The House will please come to order. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House resolve itself into committee of the whole to consider only the budget bill, House Bill 1.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Chairman Burkhart.
House will come to order.
Continuation. It's underneath your paper.
Okay, we are continuing with the explanation of the budget bill, House Bill number 1. And Chairman or Representative Stiff, proceed.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Members, I present to you Agency 51 Livestock Board. This is a fun budget page to study. It is page 45 of the budget bill, page 19 of the summary sheet. And you've just got to hand it to this agency. If there were an Academy of Motion Budgets, this agency would be up for a nomination. It's amazing what they've been able to do. It's just one page, but there's lots of tricks in here. It's really fun to look at. First off, notice that if you're on this sheet here, they actually do cut out over 12% of their general fund. 12% of their general fund. They really did do that. If you look in the next column over, though, it's only 1% of total funds that gets cut. Okay. And how did they do that? It's amazing. Essentially what they've done, and you'll see this in red on the left column, there is $513,909 of essentially what amounts to a fund swap. So they save the general fund that much money and they make it up by taking from brand inspection fees, essentially. So as far as employees go, there are 102 brand inspectors, and after this bill passes, there will be 102 brand inspectors. So life is good. The agency has a total of 114 employees. After we do this budget and they take their 12% cut of the general fund, they'll have 114 employees. So they still get to have Chateaubriand on Wednesdays. It's great. Okay, with Wyoming beef. What they've done here is that it's a total, there is a real cut here of about $200,000 that they've taken out of their 600 and 900 series. The 900 series is contract services. So that's part of that is $100,000 that would go to assist county sheriffs in their law enforcement investigations. In 2019, they got a $250,000 one-time appropriation. They've still got that money. They don't need it. So you'll notice in the sort of the real budget bill itself, what's interesting, I think, is when you turn to the back page, this $100,000 will not be included in the ongoing budget. That's kind of an interesting note. So in their standard budget next cycle, they will not be presenting that. And then for illustrative purposes, this agency also has a section 300 portion to it. That is, they had $50,000 in their animal health and in their fund. If you look back to 300M, which I believe is on page, the budget bill toward the back, excuse me just one moment, page 97 of the budget bill, you'll see that notwithstanding the limitations in our session laws from 2020, the state auditor shall transfer $50,000 from the animal reimbursement program account to the general fund. So this agency is actually giving back $50,000 to the general fund out of this account that helps with brucellosis mitigation. So it's really quite amazing how they've been able to do a real cut to the general fund, which actually is helpful, helps us all, and yet the agency operations, services to the public continue on as before. So congratulations to them. And with that, I would stand for questions.
Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Will there be a brand fee increase that goes along with this, or can they do it with their current fee structure?
Chairman Flitner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to speak to the law enforcement account, the reason that money was appropriated was just because livestock theft was an issue. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that, if they've, how that problem is, if it's persisting, and if there's no longer a need for that, please give us an update on that, please. Thank you.
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, so if you would like, Mr. Majority Floor Leader, if you'd like to, my understanding is that brand inspection fees do increase slightly. There's no free lunch, no free Chateaubriand after all. And on the law enforcement assistance, that fund, there was a one-time appropriation of $250,000 from a couple of years ago. There's still money there. So my understanding is that the assistance to law enforcement will continue. They're just not going to be using the extra $100,000 that the legislature appropriated last year. That's my understanding. But if the Majority Floor Leader would like to clarify that, if I've made any mistakes, I'd be happy to stand aside.
Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. No, that's pretty accurate. Actually, what happened is I passed a bill last session that had a $50,000 appropriation in it that went into that pot of money for indemnification. They pulled that 50,000 out, but there's still more than 250,000. I think there's more like $400,000 to $500,000 in that pot. And to the good chair of TRW's question, that money was set aside to do training between sheriffs and the enforcement officers. And they, in testimony, they felt they could get the work done and they had to find some place to cut. So that's how they cut.
Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple questions. First off, concerning footnote 6, there's a reduction by the chief executive's recommendation of a whopping $800. So I'm curious about that. And then also moving up to footnote number 5, excuse me, that notes that the committee adopted letter number 4 of just shy of 3.5 million for critical IT hardware. And I'm wondering if the good representative could elaborate a little bit on that, because I guess from my perspective, I know just talking to my local brand inspector that their computer systems have been less than stellar. And so is that going to computers and IT work in the field, or is that more for the home office? So thank you.
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to the computer issue, we saw this in Agency 15, Attorney General as well, that the $3.4 million is spread across all agencies. The net reduction to this agency is $6,770 with respect to their computer system. And I, to be honest, don't know exactly which computers aren't getting upgraded, but that sounds like 4 or 5 workstations is what it sounds like, may not be upgraded from where they are. And I think we all recognize there are IT needs. With respect to the other question of the $800 there on line 6 with brucellosis mitigation, I don't know. That's an $800. I actually tried to read through to find out what that $800 is. It's probably in this book somewhere. I just didn't find it. So I don't have an explanation for that.
Representative Sherwood.
Mr. Chair, if someone could please speak to the issue that there is only one senior criminal investigator for the Livestock Board that covers the entire state. And then there have been cuts to this individual's travel budget, which makes it difficult for them to spend the night out and cover more communities. And I'm just wondering if this is sufficient to meet the needs of the industry.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was really a reduction that took place 2 years ago. There used to be 4 investigators statewide, and it was reduced to 1. And then the intent is to utilize the local law enforcement to assist with the local brand inspectors and local folks in that area in pursuing these cases. And so thus far, it seems to be working. We'll all admit nothing's ideal. We'd always like to have more and more, but it seems to be a situation that's working well to this point.
Any other questions on section 51? Representatives, Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And actually, there's two investigator positions because we authorized one last year with special revenue. And so there is two now covering the whole state, and mostly what their job is to train local law enforcement.
Any other questions or comments on section 51? Thank you. Absent any objection, section 51 is closed. Next section is section 53. Representative Simpson.
Mr. Chairman, I bring you section 53, workforce services. Members, you can find that on page 21 of your status report, and on page 47 of the budget bill. Mr. Chairman, the Joint Appropriations Committee adopted all of the chief executive's recommended general fund budget cuts in the Department of Workforce Services totaling $3,218,458. Of this figure, $1,318,851 is the overall reduction to their budget. This agency did a great job in 2020 distributing the CARES Act money to people throughout the state of Wyoming, and will undoubtedly play a critical role in distributing money from the new COVID relief bill currently being approved by Congress. This agency employs 553 employees. Their budget makeup is 11% from the general funds, 49% from federal funds, and 40% other funds. They administer 55 distinct programs authorized by state and federal law. They recently moved 250 employees from 4 separate locations here in Cheyenne into one centrally located office building. Let's look into more detail of this proposed budget cut. Under administration and support, the top left-hand corner of your status report, there is a $2,317,915 cut from the general fund, coupled with an increase of $920,425 from federal funds and an increase of $296,718 from the enterprise funds and $21,621 from special revenue. These increases from other sources was a result of shifting existing personnel from being funded by the general fund into other programs, the largest being federal funds. As can be seen on the status report, that is a net reduction in this division of $1,079,151. This is explained under footnote number 1. Again, we're on page 21 of your status report. Footnote 1 indicates the net reduction is taken from the 200 series support services for the amount of $103,327, $948,719 from series 600 grants and aid payments, and $32,180 from contract services. Let's talk about footnote number 2. Later today, I will be discussing the Wyoming Business Council's budget. One of their proposals was to eliminate the Wyoming Council for Women Issues. In our opinion, this is a highly successful program, perhaps just didn't fit into the Wyoming Business Council's overall vision and mission. Through many stakeholders' input, it was agreed that the program should not be eliminated, but rather transferred to another agency who would be able to nurture and support the program. The Director of Workforce Services graciously said she would take the program. So you will see later on that we will transfer that budget from the original agency to this one. This is described in the budget, footnote number 2. This is the footnote in the budget, page 48. Next line down, the vocational rehabilitation program proposes to transfer one employee who was funded through the general fund, partially through federal funding, to be funded entirely through the enterprise fund. This is described in footnote number 3. The net result is a savings to the general fund but no total change to the agency's overall budget because the employee was only transferred on paper. Back to the worksheet on the status report. The Labor Standards Division of this agency reduced the general fund budget by $691,991. However, floating your eyes to the right, you can see that the actual reduction to this program was $239,700. On footnote 4, these actual reductions were further defined as $11,200 from support services, $7,500 from contract services. The larger reduction figure of $221,000 came from the department's work in evaluating their efficiencies and trying to make their agency better. They determined that a software they had been using for many years, which retained the quote, residency and fair employment tracking database, unquote, which had a significant maintenance fee, could now be replaced with a database software which the state already has a license for, thus saving $221,000 per biennium. Those are the kind of cuts that we found consistent throughout all the agencies. The request for them to reduce money, they went internally and found efficiencies, and this was just literally money right back into our general fund by using a less expensive software. The additional numbers you will see under labor standards are shifting 3 employees from the general fund to another division. That reduces this group from 13 employees to 10 employees. In the workers' compensation and OSHA division, the general fund budget was reduced by $4,535. Footnote number 4 explains that this is a shift of expenses to a different allocated resource. The final division is the disability determination division. They reduced the general fund appropriation by $192,058, but then raised the federal funding by the same amount. Footnote 6 indicates that the department has explained that this money represents a full-time employee whose position has been solely utilized to assist the division in fiscal functions and should appropriately be funded under the Social Security Disability federal funds. Mr. Chairman, that includes the budget report of Section 53, the Department of Workforce Services. I stand for questions.
Representative Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question pertains to the number of full-time employees cut. This is a fairly large division. Could you repeat exactly how many were cut and explain why that number was reached?
Representative Simpson.
Mr. Chairman, this department did not take any personnel reductions. I want you to bear in mind something real critical. Right when the governor asked everyone to reduce their budgets, we received the CARES Act money. This department really worked very hard. They could not afford to cut in employees in this last year because they were doing overtime, not only doing their regular job, but managing all the other issues that were going on with the CARES Act money that they were distributing out. You might find it of interest in their evaluations of CARES Act applications. There was over 1,000 applications that were determined to be fraudulent that they rejected as a result of their follow through and verifying legitimate applications.
Any other questions on Section 53? Absent any objection, Section 53 is closed. Next section is Section 57. Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 57 is the Community College Commission. You'll find that on page 21 of your summary sheet, page 49 of your budget. Their total general fund reductions were $29 million, which represents about 11.5% of their total general fund appropriation. If we go to the notes, Starting with number one, JAC adopted the gov's total reduction recommendation of, I got my glasses, here we go, that helps, of $79,000 to the 100 series, which was the reduction of one full-time employee in their public information, public relations position. Notes 2 and 3 are actually connected. What the committee did was, in number 2, you'll see we replaced $108,000 of school foundation funding with $108,000 of general fund. And then in note 3, we reduced that same amount of general fund money by eliminating another full-time position, which was a policy analyst in the agency. Note number 4, and this is where we get your big one, we adopted the gov's rec of a $27.8 million reduction in general fund in the 600 series. And this is the big piece of what the Community College Commission does. This is the grants to the community college, which was being reduced by 28 million, which will reduce the total to 207 million. And that is the biggest part of this agency's budget. It also included a cut to the libraries of 251,000. And there was also action related to the Wyoming Works program, which I will discuss with you when we get to the Section 300 series. Note number 5, we adopted the gov's rec to reduce 61,000 general fund. Most of that was 600 series grants for 8 adult education programs around the state and 200 series support for high school equivalency tests. Do note these programs are not going away. It is a reduction in funding. Part of it will be easy to manage because of a higher reliance on virtual learning and reduction in the sites where they conduct the tests. Note number 6, we adopted the gov's rec. This is in the WIN program, which is the Wyoming Investment in Nursing. It's a loan and grant program. This reduction will not affect any nurses that are in the program. It just reduces the amount of money available for future loans and grants. Number 7, we adopted the gov's rec to reduce $375,000 of general fund. This is for the Veterans Tuition Waiver Program. That reduction will bring the appropriation in line with what the actual grants have been in recent years. And then number 8 is a reduction in the Wyoming Teacher Shortage Program, also known as Wappler. And this reduction, the program actually sunsetted at the end of June 2020, and these were dollars that were left in the program. And that leaves the 9th one, which is a reduction in funding of $440,000 for Wyoming Public Television, which is a program I love and I hate to see it, but everybody takes a cut. And that completes the Community College Commission, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on section 57? Okay, absent any objection, section 57 is closed. Next section is section 60. Representative Kinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to bring you section 60, state lands and investments, found on page 22 of your summary sheet and 51 of your bill. Mr. Chairman, in note number 1, there is an awful lot going on, and I will break it up into 3 sections. So first of all, we see reductions in one full-time equivalent position that was recommended by the governor of $75,000, general fund 100 series, a reduction of $127,000 general fund in the 200 series, and a reduction of $175,000 general fund in the 600 series for grants and aids for the noxious weed program, and general fund reduction in the 900 series. That was actually for the noxious weeds. Also in that section, we see some large numbers swapping around, $1,152,779. This swap was in step 2, actually, and it was in the operations division and the drinking water revolving fund. And this swap was to swap general funds to the local CapCon account funds, the federal mineral royalty CapCon account, to reduce the agency's reliance on the general fund while still allowing the state to apply for related drinking water grants, which have been very high, matching federally. And so that was important. And this swap also included a 10% reduction. And finally, in the note number 1 in the operations unit, the JAC also struck footnote number 1 on page 52 of the bill to conform with the governor's recommendation to eliminate $500,000 for the state trust lands noxious and hazardous weed mitigation. This was just a one-time reduction to the general fund. In note number 2, the JAC also added section 300N to conform with the governor's rec to reduce $75,000 related to a state trust land proposal. And actually the proposal was put together, but the funding wasn't needed. It was done internally. And so therefore those funds were not spent. Note number 3, the JAC made a 15% reduction to the school foundation program. This is part of the larger global swap for this unit of $58,000. And related to this, the JAC added footnote number 5 on page 53 to indicate that this reduction will biennialize to 20%. And footnote 5 further reduces 19,000, which is another 5% for the next biennium. Footnote number 4, or note number 4 rather, the JAC adopted the governor's recommendation for reductions in the forestry division of 48,000 general fund, and that is actually after a swap where we took general funds and we converted a FTE, one full-time FTE, to federal funds, and that was done along with a reduction in the 200 series. And then also in note number 5, very similar, the JAC adopted the governor's recommendation of reductions for the fire division of $637,000. And that was also after converting one full-time equivalent from the general fund to federal funds. And then note number 6 is kind of an interesting one, because what we see happening here, you'll see that the governor, or the JAC denied the governor's reduction recommendation of $10,500,000 to local distributions to cities, towns, and counties. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason we did that was that, if you remember, and for those new members, we handled that in a separate bill, which, by the way, comes out of the $105 million to local distributions for cities, towns, and counties, comes out of the LSRA. And so it really wasn't appropriate to include it in this section. However, it is administered in this section, so that's why that appears. And ladies and gentlemen, we will be discussing that soon on our general file. You will note Senate File 64, which also addresses a reduction that we have tackled in JAC, and we'll be bringing to you once the majority floor leader moves that up the committee of the whole list. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on section 60 or the thrilling topic of noxious weeds? Seeing none, absent any objection, section 60 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 63. Representative Nicholas, Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll bring you the explanation of 63 and then of 66. Governor's residence is very simple. As you can see, it was about an $88,000 reduction, and most of that was in contract services and then food supply. And so with that, I will bring you section 66, Wyoming tourism. This is another fun one. So 83% of their funds is basically a fully integrated marketing system, and the remainder goes to their personnel and operations. They have 24 employees. They cut $3.4 million out of their budget, which is a $26.5 million budget, which is 15%. So they did the full reductions. Even the better news is that we passed a lodging tax not too long ago. And so in 2023, that $23 million that is that general fund dollars will be paid for by the lodging tax, and those dollars will then go back to the general fund we can use for general operations of government. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on section 63 or 66? Seeing none, absent any objection, section 63, I'm sorry. Okay. Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So on section 63, did we in the past set any money aside for a new construction on a different governor's residence?
Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish. If you recall, I was leading that charge. Ladies and gentlemen, about 2 years ago, we had a interim committee where we evaluated the governor's residence and concluded that it needed either a major remodel or a tear down or build a new governor's residence. And that report's available, I think, on the legislative website. But because of the funding shortfall and what transpired, that was the CapCon bill didn't pass and it was pulled out of CapCon. That was part of our controversy. So there are no money set aside at this point.
Any other questions on section 63 or 66? Absent any objection, section 63 and 66 are closed. Next section is section 67. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, for an explanation of section 67, the University of Wyoming, please refer to page 24 on your summary sheet and pages 56 through 63 on your bill. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's recommended reduction of $42,971 general fund. This includes 2.2 million for the family medical residency division and 2.185 for the WWAMI medical education division, as noted in summary notes 1, 3, and 4. JAC added footnote number 9 relating to the delivery of future medical education at the University of Wyoming. JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendations for reductions to the School of Energy Resources of $2 million, Tier 1 Engineering $953,000, $227,000 for the in-car MOU, all general fund dollars, as noted in summary notes 5, 6, and 7. JAC adopted the chief executive's recommended reductions to endowments of $6.25 million general fund and deleted footnote number 8 that had specified endowment amounts for the College of Engineering, Agriculture, and the Science Initiative, summary note 8. I would also point out that major maintenance for the University of Wyoming was reduced by approximately $11 million as a result of reducing the percent of CRV, cost replacement value, from 2% to 1.5%. This action will be discussed further in section 308 of the budget. With that explanation, are there any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Any questions on section 67? Absent any objection, section 67 is closed. Next section is section 69. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For an explanation of section 69, WICHE, please refer to page 24 on your summary sheet and page 64 on your bill. WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education, has a biennial budget of $5.1 million, of which over 90% goes to support fees for students in health professional programs. The majority of these students are contractually obligated to return to the state to practice healthcare. This is not a university program, although the university has been the administrator for many years. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's recommendation of $574,000 being reduced in general funds for student grants. With that, are there any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Speaker Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could the good presenter remind the body what health profession does not have an obligation to the state?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is one health profession, and it deals with the entity that doesn't have opposable thumbs. So all veterinarians are exempt from that requirement to come back and practice in the state of Wyoming.
Thank you. Any other questions on section 69? Absent any objection, section 69 is closed. Next section is section 70. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, for an explanation of Section 70, Enhanced Oil Recovery Commission, EORC, please refer to page 25 on your summary sheet and page 64 on your bill. The Enhanced Oil Recovery Commission, or EORC, was created by the legislature with the intent to backfill the vacuum left during the oil market depression in the 1970s and 80s. The goal was to facilitate a meaningful and measurable increase in recoverable reserves and production of oil and gas in Wyoming that may not have otherwise been realized. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's recommended reductions totaling $751,000 general fund, $55,000 for the technical advisory board, travel and printing, $696,000 by suspending the annual CO2 Enhanced Oil Recovery Conference and reducing 3 FTE and reduced office space that was provided to the Wyoming Energy Authority. With that, are there any questions, Mr. Chairman?
Are there any questions on section 70? Absent any objection, section 70 is closed. The next section is section 77. Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, I present Agency 77, Enterprise Technology Services. So the budget cuts here are relatively straightforward. What's complicated is explaining exactly how this agency works and what it does. It's essentially, as you may recall, set up about 8 years ago to consolidate all of our computer IT services in one agency, to centralize things with a strategic view toward economies of scale and the idea of having a more unified data architecture statewide across all of our computer systems. So that's a very long, complicated, ongoing process. You can see on your summary sheet that percentage-wise, this agency cut the general fund by about 5.3%. The Joint Appropriations Committee made no changes to the governor's recommendation. Now, what the legislature did a year ago was for all of the information technology requests. So a year ago in the budget, the legislature did not fund it for both years. It funded it just for 1 year. So we essentially cut every agency's IT request in half last year. So that was already done. And the problem is if you take another $6 million out of that, the governor's office believed that that was cutting too deep. So in our chief executive's letter number 4, he asked that $3.4 million get put back for IT services. We've talked about that with some of the other agencies. Agency 51 was one of them, got a few $1,000s. Agency 15 got a few $1,000s. Most of that $3.4 million, 2.995 of it gets put back into this agency. And the idea, and it's for what's called the unified network. And so the idea is that you don't want to cut the ability of our computer network statewide to work. It supports the schools, it supports all the other agencies. And with that explanation, I would stand for questions.
Any questions on section 77? Absent any objection, section 77 is closed. Next section is section 80. Representative Stith. Representative Stith. Clark. Representative, we're on section 80.
Section 80. This is our Department of Corrections. So Department of Corrections, you can see that Department of Corrections, it took a real hit and takes a real hit in this budget. They are eliminating a lot of positions. It's a 10% cut. This is a very large agency. You can see on your summary sheet, we're on page 26 of the summary sheet. You'll see, if you can see for the number of employees, we're down 167 employees fewer in this department. That's a big cut. And so This agency, if there were awards for budget cutting, this agency did the substance of it. It really took a hard look at what it takes to have our correctional facilities work, to make them work. And we quizzed the director at some length during our budget hearings in December about whether this actually works. And the director believes that we can continue to provide a, sort of a safe working environment and meet all of our constitutional obligations with respect to our correctional services. You may see a budget amendment coming on this one because we've cut so many people here. One of the areas that needs perhaps to be backfilled are for field services for probation officers. You may recall during our virtual session, we had a bill to increase or establish fees for probationers for them to essentially pay for their own probation officers. This body defeated that bill, so that bill is dead, but you may see an amendment to try to backfill that so that we have our probation officers doing what they need to do. With that, would stand for questions.
Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have two questions and just kind of a note to the newer folks. Out of necessity, this summary sheet obviously is a massive condensation. I mean, there's no other way to do it, but looking in the actual supplemental budget request, two things that struck my mind. I mean, many things struck my mind, but the presenter did point out the massive reduction in staffing. But I'm looking on page 17 of the department's budget request, which most of you probably don't have in front of you. And I see one of the things this was in a step 2 COVID reduction, but they have eliminated independent contracts for religious coordinators pretty much at all of the facilities. And from the narrative, it looks like the intention is to, instead of having a religious coordinator at each facility, to go to, I think it said 2, who would sort of oversee things across the state, and then you would have this sort of coordination kind of tacked on to people's jobs at the facility. And I bring this particular thing up because, when a person is in prison, their life needs to change, or they're just going to be back a lot. I really feel like these are valuable positions in addition to just the corrections type officers. And I just would like to hear a little bit about how the prison system is expecting to make up for this. I mean, obviously we hope to have volunteers from the community, but I would like to hear just a little bit about that discussion. And then the other thing that I would like to bring up is on page 79 of the corrections operations unit. And I maybe just need to know more about it. It says that they're going to give up accreditation by the American Correctional Association. And I know that sounds like kind of like a paperworky thing. And maybe just a good way to save $141,000. But it does seem to me that having our prisons, I mean, how many states run prison systems that aren't accredited? I mean, that just doesn't sound good. And it does point out that the accreditation may be considered, a defense against litigation when there are concerns. So in the grand scheme of their cuts and their budget, perhaps that's small, but that would be other thing I'd like to hear a little bit about, just so the religious coordinator issue and the accreditation issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Stith, got all that?
To the good representative from District 7, I'm not sure I have a satisfactory answer on the religious coordinator. It is true that does appear, I believe, on page 17 in the budget book, that they have moved funding from that. And the director did talk with us about that. But to be honest, I'm not sure I have a satisfactory answer for you of exactly what scope of spiritual services are needed and whether this substitute's going to work or not. And I'll need to get back with you on the second part of your question.
Minority Floor Leader Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have questions on footnotes 3 and 5 on the summary sheet. And I'll just start by saying that having served on both the Appropriations Committee and Judiciary Committee, directors of the department have always come to us and have said that they are the institution in the state that honestly deals with more substance abuse and mental illness than any other institution that we have. And so that being the case and everyone understanding that, I am curious about on footnote 3, an elimination of $500,000 for secure residential substance abuse treatment contact beds. And then on 5, the $672,889 for contract services that look like they might be associated with the split sentencing and substance abuse assessment, although that might be the $352,000. And then $440,000 for alternative sanctions for probationers and parolees. So we're talking about, well over $1 million there that's directed to those kinds of services. And I'm wondering if we could get some more information.
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, for the good representative from District 13, it is certainly the case from a public policy point of view that we want to make sure that when people are released on probation and parole, that they get substance abuse counseling and services like that, because we saw from 4 or 5 years ago when the legislature cut that funding, then in subsequent years, we saw a spike in recidivism. But through the suite of bills that we labeled justice reinvestment, we've essentially been able to ensure that that service continues. With respect to the specific cut referred to here in note 3 on page 26 of our summary sheet, we spoke with the director. We have a new director for this department who believed that resources were adequate to continue the level of services that were needed on. And with respect to the Series 900 contract services, I need to look back in the budget book to see exactly what that was. But I think there was broad policy agreement that you don't want to skimp on substance abuse treatment because that's a service that's going to have an effect when they're released on probation, parole, or when they complete their sentences.
Representative Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This may not be a fair question for my former colleague from the Judiciary Committee, but the House Appropriations had an opportunity to look at this entire budget in total. And we're looking at it today and yesterday, department by department. And what I'm noticing over and over again is some significant disparity between how some agencies have been asked to absorb huge personnel cuts and others virtually none or very minimal. And the terms essential employee and non-essential employee come to mind. And I'm wondering, did House Appropriations take a big look at just how the optics of this appear when some departments are just hammered for personnel cuts and other large departments, very large departments, have virtually none? And just more of a public policy question.
Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, that's certainly an issue that we did discuss at some length because in one of the documents that we focused on, many of us focused on, I believe, was the so-called vacancy list. That is, the agencies gave us a list of vacancies, that is, positions that were funded in the budget, but for which there was no person currently working there. And if the vacancy had lasted more than 10 months or more than 12 months, then that tends to indicate that this is a position that they don't necessarily need. So of the 167 positions, I don't know the exact number of how many of them were vacancies that were eliminated, but there were a fair number of those. But the representative is correct that you do have these significant disparities between agencies. I think process-wise, the reason that happened was because when our chief executive asked the agencies to do these step 2 and step 3 cuts, it was left up to the agency heads to essentially customize the cuts that they wanted to make within their agencies. So that's one of the reasons why you have, instead of having an across-the-board FTE cut, for example, or an across-the-board Series 900 cut, for example. So that's process-wise why it happened. But that's a very legitimate question. I think it's something that we should all certainly look at when you're considering potential amendments you may want to bring to the budget. And I think you may see an amendment for this agency to add back in approximately 6 full-time equivalents for probation field services.
Chairman Nicholas, did you have something to add?
Well, I think he, Mr. Chairman, I think he answered it fairly accurately. So let's go back to the process. We spent about 10 days running through these, every single agency and every one of the reductions. And so we had to make the determination, are we going to go with the Gov's recs or not? And so we called in every agency and have them present what their cuts were. And I can tell you quite honestly, we were frustrated. But what we didn't really have time to do is go into an in-depth detail and saying, no, we want you to cut here, here, and here. Just because this all happened in a fairly short time span. And so in the situation, we said, on the agencies that were before us who did it right, we congratulated them. On those ones that we said, we're not proud of the work you did. Well, we're going to support this and move it forward because it's the Gov's rec and you're kind of holding your breath and seeing what happens. But if we have any further reductions of any kind necessary, we're going to come back and relook at this. And we may come back and relook at this on next time that when we actually have our budget session and we do more in-depth, when we do more of a four-week deep dive into these processes. But yeah, we share the frustration of the floor on that particular issue.
Chairman Olson, were you waiting to ask a question? Thank you. Any other questions on section 80? Absent any objections, section 80 is closed. Representative Stith, please stay there. We are now on section 81.
Mr. Chairman, members, the Board of Parole, section 81. The Joint Appropriations Committee made no changes from the governor's recommendation. This is a small agency. It takes a total reduction of 1 full-time equivalent position. And comparing it percentage-wise, we see the Board of Parole looks to be a 13.8% reduction in general fund. So it meets its step 2 and step 3 targets.
Any questions on section 81? Absent any objection, section 81 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 85. Representative Simpson.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, is it you or Representative Schwartz? Representative Simpson, please continue.
Mr. Chairman, I bring you section 85, Wyoming Business Council. Can be located on page 27 of your status report and page 69 of the budget bill. Mr. Chairman, this agency has 3 programs that were affected by the general fund budget cuts. I draw your attention to the spreadsheet on page 27 of the status report. Under the Wyoming Business Council, the first budget cut is for $1,105,567. Footnote number 1 breaks that number down. It includes a reduction of $856,970 for personnel services. These are full-time employees who were reduced. An additional cut of $192,687 for travel, real property rental, and professional development. The remainder of footnote number 1 talks about the transfer of the Wyoming Wyoming Council for Business Issues to the Department of Workforce Services. We talked about that earlier today. This is located in the budget bill, footnote number 1 on page 69. The next division is the Economic Diversification Program. They sustained a $480,000 budget cut. Footnote number 2 indicates that the JAC adopted the governor's recommendation to include $130,000 for Series 600 grants and aid payments to local communities and businesses, as well as $350,000 for contract services. For your information, that $350,000 for contract services is not outside consultants, but rather business partners that they had. For example, the University of Wyoming, the State Chamber, and the Wyoming Women's Business Center. They were the consultants, partnerships who were receiving that contract services. The final program is the Investment Ready Communities Program. The JAC adopted the governor's reduction recommendation of $2,478,457 for grants, aid payments for the Business Ready Community Program. Footnote number 4 indicates, and you can see that on your spreadsheet as you float your eyes across to the red number on the right, the JAC further cut that program by $1,250,000. This results in a total reduction for this agency of $5,314,024. That is clarified in footnote number 2 located in the budget bill, which states that the additional cut will be biennialized after this immediate fiscal biennium. Mr. Chairman, that includes the budget report for Section 85, Wyoming Business Council. I stand for questions.
Any questions on Section 85? Representative Gray, did you have a question on 85? Thank you. Absent any objection, Section 85 is closed. Next section is Section 90. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, for an explanation of Section 90, Wyoming Energy Authority, please refer to page 28 on your summary sheet and page 70 on your bill. Mr. Chairman, during the 2019 legislative session, Enrolled Session Act 0014 created the Wyoming Energy Authority. The Wyoming Energy Authority is a combination of the Wyoming Pipeline Authority, formerly Agency 009, and the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority, formerly Agency 032. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's recommended reductions totaling $157,000 general funds. This includes the closure of the Pipeline Authority office in the central part of the state, elimination of a vacant administrative position, elimination of a contract with a third-party accounting firm, and elimination of all outreach, promotion, communication, and project expenses. JAC also adopted footnote number 1 to clarify that the appropriations and reductions to the Wyoming Energy Authority should come from prior effective immediate appropriations to the Wyoming Pipeline Authority and the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority in the 2020 budget bill, and does not represent new money or new appropriations. Are there any questions?
Any questions on Section 90? Absent any objection, Section 90 is closed. Next section for our consideration is Section 96. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the new state budget department. We created this department last year. And so as a result, because it's a brand new agency, it was separated out from A&I. They are actually to this day, they're still getting their feet underneath themselves, making sure that they got the sufficient number of employees and getting the operation as a new agency. So when they came and presented to us, they basically almost didn't have a budget to cut, because we just sliced the A&I, moved it over there, and we're juggling things around to see what's fit. In fact, what they said they would do during committee hearings was after this budget session, through this interim, they'll come back and tell us if they need more, if they need less, and how to move forward. So with that, they have a few minor reductions amounted to about 2.5% of their budget. And so real quickly, you'll see that on footnote 2, a reduction of 9,000 general fund on printing that we denied because we wanted those things printed. Then the remaining of that, the $54,000 in general funds and 16 and 2000 series, we approved. And there you see we reduced the 9,000 and the 900 series in number 3. And we authorized carryover from the state budgeting system enhancements. That's about $41,000 to continue with that program. So thank you. That's all on 96.
Any questions on section 96? Absent any objection, section 96 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 98. Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I will present it. It's no longer my agency. If you will just give me a moment. So 98 is the guardian ad litem, and it was previously part of the public defender's office, and it was spun off into its own entity. So the budget they've got is merely the monies that were taken to cover it. So you will see that is related to session laws from 2020, and they reduced just 383,000 general fund and 95 special revenue, which is, as I mentioned, in the public defender's office, that is the local contribution that is required. And that was just, you can see what the cuts are in that. And I apologize for not being prepared to answer this because I thought it was no longer my agency. But if you ask me questions, I will get you answers.
Any questions on section 98? Absent any objection, section 98 is closed. Next section is section 101. Chairman Nicholas.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Wyoming Supreme Court. The court systems are fairly unique. Obviously, it's our third leg of government. But and it's also unique in the sense that, number one, the wages for judges is statutory. So you can't go in and cut wages. And that's the only way to do that is statutorily to address the justices themselves. And so they're about 92% roughly of staffing versus other things. And so it's a little bit more difficult for them to go in and cut. So you'll see that these cuts aren't significant compared to the size of the budget, but that's the problem that we have. And frankly, if you pay attention to the courts, typically, and on most cases, we're understaffed and their caseloads are excessive. Most of the studies say we need more judges, but frankly, it's just, they're very expensive, and operation of the courts are very expensive. So it's kind of a catch-22 for us, but we continue to plod on through it. So just going to page 29 of your summary sheet, page 72 of your budget, and we'll just walk really quickly through some of those reductions. Basically, we adopted all of the courts recs, which is what, so the courts make their recommendation to the governor, but really it's the court's recommendations, not the governor's recommendations. And so we adopted the court's recommendations for reducing one full-time equivalent. You'll see that. That's the 470,000. And then also 100 series and 200 series combined in line 1. Line 2, we adopted their total reduction recommendation of 247,000, which is a reduction of 2 full-time equivalents through that line and the added cost to it. And also a delay in the Chancery Court. And for those who don't know, we created the Chancery Court. That's a court that's going to be a business court. It's going to be based out of Casper. And we're slowing down that process in order to basically save money and to start up the court and use temporary judges as we move forward in the meantime. But we're just slowing down the process, and that saves I forgot what the number is, 247,000, I believe. If we go to Yeah, that's on line 2. You'll see that there on the reductions. Well, number 3, the courts reduced the recommendation of 90,000 general funds and $55,000 for 200 series and 900 series on contract services. So they're just trying to use less contracting. Often they do that for court reporting, they do it for travel, they do it for those type of things. Number 4, total reduction of 600,000 general funds. That's a reduction. of two-
Representative Nicholas, is your
I'm sorry.
microphone on?
Closer to the mic.
Thank you.
2 full-time equivalents. Footnote 5, reduction to the court, a total reduction of 339,000. That's for maintenance and supports, and particularly municipal cases. And the options on A, there's the delay of the implementation of, no, this is their court management system. It's a software program. They delayed purchasing that and implementing it in order just to save funds over time. And a one-time reduction of 1.7 million amended on foot number 3 to conform with those JAC reductions. So once again, that's just slowing down the process of, and which is be a one-time reduction. So we're likely to see that back. And then number 6, that's the reduction recommended of 250,000, 100 series personnel services and 3 part-time equivalents to 3 judges that have passed away. That has to do with their retirement. They have a separate retirement program. And so by those, when those judges retire and no other judges come onto the system, it just saves them money. And so they just use that as a grounds for saving dollars, although it's, I don't know if I would call it a legitimate claim in terms of reduction, but it definitely does reduce their budget. But it would have happened anyway, so. And the last one, we adopt the court's recommendation of $38,000 to include $17,000, again, support service and contract services on line 7. So that's the court systems, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on section 101? Absent any objection, section 101 is closed. Next section is Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there any appropriation for the building space in the Chancery Court budget? And that's my question. Thank you.
Representative Chairman Nicholas. Okay, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer the good question about the space for the Chancery Court, all of that discussion is located within the capital construction bill. There is nothing within the Supreme Court budget relating to the actual space for the Chancery Court.
Any other questions on section 101? Absent any objection, section 101 is closed. Next section to consider is section 103. Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, members, I present Agency 103, the Commission on Judicial Conduct and Ethics. This agency only has one employee, the director, and it has 12 volunteer commissioners. So and this is an agency that you don't want to eliminate it, right? If you can't get rid of that one employee, otherwise you don't have a Commission on Judicial Conduct and Ethics. This is the agency that deals with disciplinary proceedings against judges if someone believes that the particular judge has not conformed with the code of judicial ethics for judges. So they take the agency is very small. 370,000 is the total agency budget. So they're cutting 10% of that, exactly $37,000. And how do they do that? Essentially, because they don't have a full-time prosecutor, if they do have to have a prosecutor to conduct a disciplinary proceeding against a judge, they pay that person under a contract. And so they're just saying, well, usually we need to spend $102,000 for that. We're going to cut that to $37,000 and hope it works. That's not an ideal situation, but that's what this commission did to try to meet the step 2 10% budget reduction.
Any questions on section 103? Question? Absent any objection, section 103 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 120 through 142. And for the new members, we take all the judicial districts together at one time. So that's what this will be. And Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, members, so we're going to go through all of these agencies. What you'll note, and what I find is quite strange in our budget, is that each judicial district is its own separate state agency, which seems odd, right? And it is odd. Okay. In statute, as of about 19 years or so ago, the legislature adopted what was called the Set Me Free statute, which provides in statute that district courts are free of administrative or fiscal control by the Supreme Court. They are their own fiefdoms. You may ponder from a policy point of view whether that's really a good idea or not. But that explains why on page 31 through page 33, going to 35 of our, on the 37. So here's what happens. The total cut for all of these district courts is almost nothing. Okay, it's $100,000 across all of them, right? So each of them takes about a little under a $5,000 cut, 4,000 and change, right? Part of the reason it's really hard for the district courts to cut their budget because they don't pay for their overhead. They get their office space and utilities courtesy of the county, right? And so there are only 3 people who work in the judge's office. You have the judge, you have the assistant, and then the law clerk. And that's typically the minimum staffing. It's the maximum staffing. That's all they have. So it's all personnel, it's all salary. So it's very difficult for them to cut anything at all. So that is fair enough. We have 3 district courts that said, you know, we don't feel like taking a budget cut at all. So they didn't even give up 4,000 and change. And because we have this Set Me Free statute that says they're their own fiefdoms, they get to do that. So with that, would stand for any questions.
Any questions on section 120 through 142? Seeing none, absent any objections, sections 120 through 142 are closed. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I bring you section 151, District Attorney Judicial District Number 1, page 37 of your summary sheet and page 86 of your bill. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the Chief Executive's total reduction recommendation of $439,000 general fund for the 100 series personnel services for staff furloughs to occur 3 days a month. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the total supplemental Chief Executive's recommendation for $170,000 general fund to include an increase of $439,000 for 100 series personal service to reverse the staff furloughs for 3 days, a reduction of $269,000 general fund for 100 series personnel services for staff to occur 1 day a month, and a reduction of 1 full-time position, equivalent position. Are there any questions?
Any questions on section 151? Absent any objection, section 151 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 157.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring you section 157, District Attorney Judicial District Number 7, page 37 of your summary sheet and page 87 of your bill. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the Chief Executive's total reduction of $438,000 general fund for 100 series personnel services and a reduction of 3 FTE positions. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the total supplemental Chief Executive reduction or recommendation of $169,000 general funds to include an increase of 100 series personnel and 1 FTE for a practicing attorney.
Are there any questions on section 157? Representative Washut.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the good bringer, could you describe the difference between how the First Judicial District Attorney's Office and the 7th Judicial District Attorney's Office were dealt with? I see appears to be that in the First Judicial District, they got an increase of $439,950. I don't see anything similar in the 7th Judicial District. Can you explain that, please?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll have to follow up on that question just to get a little more detail. I don't have that in my notes currently, but I will get back with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions on section 157? Absent any objections, section 157 is closed. Next section is section 160. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring you section 160, county and prosecuting attorneys, page 38 of your summary sheet, page 87 of your bill. And Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's total recommended reduction of 633,000 general fund for 800 series non-operating expenditures to reimburse counties for prosecuting attorneys and their duties, or their deputies, excuse me. Are there any questions?
Any questions on section 160? Absent any objection, section 160 is closed. The next section for our consideration is section 205. Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 205, page 38 in your summary sheet, 88 in your budget bill. Section 205 might be the most efficient agency we have. They have a budget of $1.8 billion and 3 employees. And I think if all of our agencies could do that, we could all go home. But if you look at it more carefully, you will see that the bulk of that is the block grant for K-12 education, and the employees are in another place. So we will stick with the budget that actually is 205. There are 3 pieces to it. The first one is foundation and specials. Specials being special programs. There are 3 of them in that group. National Board Certification, CTE demonstration, distance education. And in that, we reduced $657,000 of school foundation programs for 600 series grant. And you will see this will be consistent. There was a 15% reduction. We will do that consistently through all of the 205 and 206 budgets of reducing 15% of school foundation funding. And in footnote 2, we sustain that in the biennium. The next group is the education reform group. The biggest piece of that is student assessment, which is done for all of our students repeatedly every year. That's the bulk of it, and also digital and distance learning. And once again, the same thing you'll see there is that 15% reduction. It amounts to 1.16 million school foundation money. Third category is student performance data. This is called the WISE system. It stands for Wyoming Integrated Educational Data System. As you can see, we denied the governor's total reduction of $884,000 of school foundation money for 200 series, which is in that budget. What that represents is a data system they're discontinuing. But I'm going to get back to this because this gets complicated. It was a swap involving positions with agency 206. And it's, so I will stop there and get to it in my next agency. And then number 4, we reduced the 900 series by 15% as we did the other 3. And I will stand for any questions.
Any questions on section 205?
Excuse me.
Absent any objection, section 205 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 206.
Section 206, page 39 in your summary sheet, page 92 in your budget bill. So we start off, the first one is the State Board of Education, which is a board appointed by the governor that helps oversee our education system. In that, we adopted the governor's total reduction of $30,000 plus general fund. That was for dues and travels and the like in the 200 series. Then in note 2, we reduced 44,000 as part of that school foundation 15% reduction, except because the Board of Education has a smaller budget, we only took 10% out. And then in the remaining 15% reductions, we proportionately increased them to cover the 5% we did not take out of the State Board of Education. I hope that is clear. It keeps coming up. What can I say? The next 4 notes are regarding leadership, finance, and IT. And this is where that $884,000 comes back. Because what the intent of doing it was, they were shifting money from the school finance agency over here. And the recommendation then was to use it as a swap for school foundation money. It was general fund reduction, and they were going to increase school foundation. It was the opinion of the JAC that actually that was just the opposite of what we wanted to do, because the biggest budget shortfall is actually in the school foundation program. And if we want to make reductions, we want to do it there and not the general fund. So we denied the governor's recommendation to do that. And as a consequence, there was a reduction of 1 FTE. I just lost my train of thought. Number 5, we reduced then 2 full-time equivalent positions for $197,000 of general fund. And then the next one, we reduced $124,000 of general fund in support series and $25,000 in 900 series grants. And this is contract services. And I apologize, my notes are illegible. So if you have a question, I will go and look at my budget or rely on the Wolverine to answer the questions for me when they come. Number 7 is we adopted the governor's total rec of 541,000 general fund decrease and an increase in school foundation to fund 1 FTE and then a reduction of 1 at-will employee. So that was kind of a fun swap. The one of note here, we reduced money to St. Stephen's School by the amount of, I believe, 300,000, but this is not a reduction to the school's funding. It is a reduction in our budget. The funding to the school will remain the same based on dollars coming from BIE, which is Bureau of Indian Education, I believe. So the school gets the same funding. It's a reduction for the state. Going to number 8, we reduced $761,000 of school foundation for personnel services. And these were once again reductions of FTEs, and these will biennialize. Number 9, once again, of 1 full-time equivalent position of school foundation money. I did not list what that FTE did. I apologize. I can get that information. Making sure I got it right. The number 10 footnote, it's not a footnote, is partly a $695 reduction in general fund, but $345,000 of that is a swap with federal funding, and the rest of it goes mostly to 900 series, which are contract services. Number 11 is once again a reduction in personnel services, 126. And number 12, we restored $70,000 general fund. This one, I know I've got it, is for the Talking Books program that came up much yesterday. It is a program that was much loved. And when we took it out of the budget There was a lot of feedback that we wanted that program to come in. It's talking books or books for people that are visually impaired. And I'm assuming I will get a lot of questions and I might have to phone a friend on this. Thank you.
Any questions on section 206? And
You.
absent any objection, section 206 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 211. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For an explanation of section 211, Board of Equalization, please refer to page 40 on your summary sheet and page 94 in your bill. Mr. Chairman, JAC adopted the chief executive's recommended reductions totaling $294,000 general funds. This includes the reduction of one FTE for $271,000 in 100 series, 17,000 in 200 series, and $5,000 in 800 or in 900 series, excuse me. And are there any questions on the Board of Equalization, section 211?
Are there any questions on section 211? Absent any objection, section 211 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 220. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move section 220, which is the Environmental Quality Council. This is found on page 40 of your status report, page 95 of your bill. Last agency before we go to section 300s. There's 2 employees in this division. They work closely with the DEQ to administer the Quality Council. In this reduction, they reduce $109,000, which we accepted, to include reduction of salaries for council members, requiring that reduction will require more meetings to be done virtually and less travel time. It also reduces the reduction in the 200 series, which is travel and vehicle expense. So with that, I'd take any questions on that little.
Any questions on section 220? Absent any objection, section 220 is closed. It will now go on to the section 300s, and Chairman Nicholas, if you were a member of your committee, will explain section 300s in general to the new members.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. In the mid-committee, as we go through these section 300s, this is where we give clear legislative intent on what we're doing on appropriations and where we define some things. And so when we really want to define in the budget to take away any misunderstanding, we generally do it in the section 300s. We also, I think, as you'll see as we go through, so we'd like to turn section, the first 300 section over to Representative Walters.
Representative Walters, section, I think 300E is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, as the good chairman just said, this is section 300, subsection E, and this is an increase of $19 million or a little over $19 million from SIPA for school capital construction. And this is for expenditures that were approved in last year's budget bill. And this was a discussion we had yesterday when the good chairman of the committee was going through the introduction on page 8. And he talked about this briefly, but severance taxes help fund our school capital construction. And severance taxes are the most volatile revenue stream into the account. And so last year, when we passed this, it was balanced based on the revenue coming in. But due to that volatility in severance taxes, we are now seeing a shortfall for the projects that were approved a year ago. And so that's why we propose this change to section 300, subsection E. I would note that when the October Craig report came out, this account actually had a $7 million surplus. And then as the January Craig came out, a certain coal mine has moved and is mining on a different part of the mine. Thus, the revenues are not the same. And so, as I said, it's volatile. The school capital construction bill is typically a bill that would come on an annual basis. This year, there is no capital construction going on in schools or being requested by schools. So I just want to point that out. So again, subsection E in section 300 is a $19 million increase from SIPA for school capital construction. Any questions?
Any questions? Representative Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for those of us who were here last year, I guess I just vehemently disagreed with using SIPA dollars to fund schools. And that was 38 million. But so now I'm hearing we're dropping another $19 million from SIPA, which I heard earlier from the good speaker is completely tapped out, which is why we had to have an amendment on the bill this morning. I just don't understand why we would drop $19 million. And the testimony was that we had previously appropriated the projects that we can't fund, but now we apparently aren't doing any capital construction anyway for another year. So we're just dropping another 20 million into an account with no projects forthcoming or proposed. Just, I guess I just need more explanation because it just doesn't make sense and it's not clicking. And I would reiterate that yes, last year's legislature made a policy decision. We're going to start using one time, as we heard this morning, strategic investment money. And I guess building a school is arguably a one-time expense outside of major maintenance. But if we could just delve into maybe the testimony and the rationale and the thought about not only taking this step, but now, I mean, is SIPA just going to become an education account in 2 more biennium? And where are we going with this? That's my question.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the question was partially answered on his own behalf when we took the logic of one-time projects using one-time funds, and that's why the SIPA account was chosen to be used in this regard. And what this is to make sure the account can pay for the projects that were approved last year. There are no new projects coming forward, but the account is, the projects have been approved, the projects are ongoing and moving forward, and the funds are needed to make sure that for completion, we have full funding to get to the completion on these projects. That's where we are, or that's the status of the projects. And it's not to put money in an account for future ideas. It is to pay for the projects that were approved last year. And I'll go back to the point that when we passed it last year, it was completely balanced. We had a surplus in the account as of October of 2020. And by January, due to the shifting of the severance, the volatility of severance tax and that shift, the account is now running slightly below the needs. And so again, we chose SIPA as it's a one-time projects, one-time dollars, one-time projects for capital construction, the same, just following the same line of reasoning that the legislature had used a year ago.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the good chairman of corporations, last year when we brought that budget to you that was fully funded, we drifted into this year when those revenues changed. And the main reason those changed is because we had some coal mines that moved off from federal lands, went off from state lands and went to federal lands. So that revenue coming in to fund those was then diminished. And so as the executive branch was looking about where they should cut their budget in this area, they went in there and they identified 3 projects. One project was up in the county south of where the valleys have stars. Then there's another in the land of Wolverines up in my part of the world. The one up in the land of the Valley of Stars is an elementary school that needed to be completed. And then in the land of Wolverines, it's the only high school in the state that doesn't have an auditorium. It wasn't built with coal money. It was built, bonded by that community. And when they done it, it come in too expensive, and this goes back a long time. And so they didn't do a football field, and they didn't do the auditorium and their value engineering. For a number of years, they've been making requests, or they had been making requests that somehow to get an auditorium in that school. And then the one up in what I will call the northeastern Bighorn County part of the world, there's a high school that's built in 1935 that has continued to come up on the list, ready to be built. And then we change the model on how we evaluate it, and it's kicked back down. It's kind of the illegitimate stepchild of K-12 of high school funding. It just gets up there and it's, Cinderella, it's gone. And we said 2 years ago that we need to get that done. And we said this anticipating that our revenues were going to be tight. We said those 3 things needed to be done. But those were the 3 things that come out. The governor suggested that come out. Through the interim, we says, no, let's hold on to that. Then revenues changed, and as the good representative pointed out, this account was actually 7 million to the good. And in October, our colleagues who sit with us in appropriations wanted to take that 7 million and put it to school major maintenance. We said, no, it's still pretty volatile. We don't know what we're going to do. And lo and behold, in January, we lost the 7 million and gone down to the minus 19 million. The problem is those three districts have been planning and moving forward in preparation of these projects. And so we pull them out, it's problematic. So we said, let's take 19 million from SIPA to take care of that. Now, what that done to us is it upset the apple cart a little bit this morning. So we had to make an adjustment in our CapCon bill where we funded the college down where the springs come out of the rocks on that community college, on all that infrastructure that was funded, I think, $11 million. And we says, we'll just do that with LSRA money. And then that kept and we are zeroed out on the SIPA that we needed to. So that's how we completed everything, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Zwanusser?
Yeah, just one more follow-up then. Why out of SIPA instead of the, I guess we'd call it the 1 cent severance tax account that we maybe we could, trying to be delicate here. I believe we might have some money in the 1 cent severance tax account that's not being spent. And if the reason we're funding schools previously appropriated is because of a severance tax issue, would it not make more sense to use the severance tax account instead of SIPA to perhaps make up that shortfall? And what might the reason we didn't do that be?
So, Mr.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, and for you new guys, this guy is just like one of the smartest we have. And he really understands, and these are great questions, and they're really kind of policy. So what do we do with the opposite, the 1% statutory tax that we get off from revenue? We'll get to that. So on one hand, you have this philosophy that's kind of related to severance. Why wouldn't we do that? On the other hand, we're saying we have this one-time SIPA money dedicated to one-time construction projects. It's kind of brown shoes, black shoes. Which ones are the best? We thought the black shoes were, and went with the SIPA dollars.
Any other questions on section 300 subsection E? Absent any objection, section 300 subsection E is closed. Next section is subsection H. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 300 subsection H is in regards to the higher education endowment. And what this does is it sweeps about $10.5 million from the income account over to the corpus. And really, this is a beautiful thing as we move. We had a good return on our investments, and we were able to generate more investment revenue. And so then what the expenditure was. So this will allow the corpus to grow. And I would use a line from one of our good colleagues when he says, compounding interest is a beautiful thing when it's working for you. And that's really what's happened here. And so we'll allow the corpus to grow with that sweep of 10.5 million.
Any questions on subsection H? Okay, absent any objection, section 300 subsection H is closed. Next section is section 300 subsection J. Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, members, I present to you section 300 subsection J. So we have an interesting policy issue going on here as part of our Justice Reinvestment Act. Last session, a year ago, we passed House Bill 31, which created the Quality Improvement Unit to deal with evidence-based assessments for substance abuse and treatment for probationers and parolees, risk assessments, making sure that we were narrowly tailoring our criminal justice resources to make sure we didn't, overtreat people or undertreat them to get a most effective outcome with the goal of reducing recidivism. This was based upon a years-long effort, a good program. So what was appropriated last year was $324,680 to be spent this year. This program, the unexpended funds in this program are about 150,000. And so what this does is as part of the step 2, step 3 budget cuts in the Department of Corrections, essentially what this does is it sends back $150,000 to the general fund, and this quality improvement unit is not going to go forward. So I would stand for questions.
Minority Floor Leader Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I get a little bit more information about the quality improvement unit and why it's not going forward, but also about or was it finished with the amount of money for less money? And then if it's not a simple reversion, it seems to me that we have $150,000 that could remain in the Department of Corrections, perhaps for that substance abuse treatment that was cut out. Do you agree?
Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, again, this is the idea. There were foreseen to have an additional 3 employees in this unit. And as part of trying to cut the number of employees and make our budget work, this program is on the chopping block. And what's left in the account for the program is about $150,000. So I think the answer is yes.
Any other questions on subsection J? Okay. Absent any objection, section 300 subsection J is closed. Next is section 300 subsection K. Representative Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, this basically is just grabbing $50,000 out of the Coalport litigation, or the Coalport marketing program. And it's just one of the recommendations of the executive branch to save money. So we didn't take all the money out. We just reduced the funding on this marketing program.
Are there any questions? Minority Floor Leader Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chair of Appropriations, is there $1 million in this account right now? And I was just curious about only 50,000. I was wondering if there was a 0 missing.
Chairman
The answer
Nicholas.
is yes. There was $1 million appropriated this fund, and this takes it down to $950,000.
Any other questions on subsection K? Absent any objections, subsection 300K is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 300 subsection M. Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Subsection M, and this is taking $50,000 out of the animal reimbursement program and moving it to the general fund. This program has it's a program for brucellosis and reimbursement for cattle and that. And there is ample funding in the program, so we can remove $50,000 from it. And I stand for any questions.
Any questions on subsection M? Seeing none and absent any objection, subsection M of section 300 is closed. Next up for our consideration is section 300 subsection N. Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In subsection N, this goes back to House Bill 162 last year, in which we appropriated $75,000 to hire a consultant to look at getting projects for the state lands in Teton County, where I live. And it was determined that we did not need to spend that money, and that because we could do it internally with OSLI. And you will be hearing more about this shortly with House Bill 164.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Just a quick point of clarification. Subsections J, K, M, and N were all separate pieces of legislation. So those dollars in those came in different bills. And that's why the reductions needed to take place in these section 300s because they were not part of the actual budget bill itself. And so just wanted to clarify that. That's again, J, K, M, and N.
Representative Yin, did you have a question? Thank you. Absent any objection, subsection N is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 303. Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I'm on page 41 of the status report and page 97 of the budget bill. I'm going to discuss the 303 section. The Appropriations Chairman described to you a little earlier today how the budget department used to be inside of the Department of Administration and Information. And last year they were pulled back out. The budget department has a software they're in the process of constructing that will bring all the budgets from all the agencies into one location. They're able to work with it. However, their money, $41,940,000 to do that, was left in the old department. And so what this footnote does is it brings that money so that it doesn't revert and is lost back to the general fund. It brings it forward to the budget department so that they can build that software. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions on subsection or on section 303? Absent any objection, section 303 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 308. Representative Larson.
So, Mr. Chairman, section 308 is where we eliminate all funding for the House's favorite committees.
Okay.
Just seeing if you were paying attention. So in section 308, this is the one that we've talked about on the SIPA funds and what we needed to do. If you'll look in section in A, every year in section 300, so we talk about major maintenance, we identify the source of funds for major maintenance and then the amount. And so if you look at line 8 there, you'll see that last year when we left, we had intended for the major maintenance funds to come out of general funds. We strike that, we add the new language, strategic investments and projects account, SIPA. Then if you go down to line 12, starting on I, that's where we appropriate the amount that's going to come out of that. Last year, it was going to be general fund dollars of 128 million. This year, we strike that, and this year we change it to SIPA dollars at 96,638,690. And we've referenced that, I believe, several times in the department construction and other places. So that's where we had to clean that language up. Okay, any questions?
Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just can't resist. So maybe if I could have a couple of answers. Have we ever used SIPA for major maintenance, certainly at this level before? And is major maintenance now going to be considered a one-time expense, which is what I keep hearing SIPA was created for? Or are we now expanding SIPA to do major maintenance moving forward in this area as well?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
Thank you. And that's really a good question, because when we've never had a financial situation like this where we were short on the general funds to cover everything. And so then the executive branch, their process, and we'll see in another bill that we're going to talk about a little later on, has to determine where they can get the money from to cover the costs. SIPA dollars, they could. We've never, to answer the question, we've never done that before, but they had the ability to use SIPA funds to replace general fund dollars, and we acknowledge that. Is this the standard practice that we would like to have moving forward? I don't think the House JEC feels that that's what we would like to do. The design of SIPA, of course, is when we identified one-time projects throughout the state that I don't want to interrupt Representative Swartz here. Can I continue, Elder Representative? Okay. So we would not anticipate, or we would hope that we wouldn't have to use SIPA dollars moving forward.
Chairman Nicholas.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to follow up on that, I talked about this in the introductory remarks, is that the budget for our next biennium that we believe will be fully funded does not include SIPA dollars for major maintenance. Our general fund will be able to cover it. And that's predictions from Craig so far.
Any other questions on section 308? Absent any objections, section 308 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 311. Representative Larson.
Thank you. And members, this is a great example of where we try to give clarification of our intent. This is one that we have every year. And if you look at this, what it says is that for the one-time funding that we oftentimes see in a bill, that the executive branch can't move that forward into the standard budget and be ongoing in the next biennium. In this one, we strike that language and what we say is that the reductions made in this supplemental budget for one-time funding or other budget reductions, sustained funding will carry, it is the intent of the legislature that these be included in the standard budget moving forward. So that just gives some clear definition of the intent of our support for these budget requests. So I'd entertain questions regarding that section.
Any questions on section 311? Seeing none, absent any objections, section 311 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 14. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talked about this earlier, or I explained it earlier. I would just say that, so this has to do with the OFSTA account. This is the 1% severance tax that we have been using over the past 4 or 5 years to help fund operations of government, just because, frankly, we're just short of fully funding all the programs that were created through the legislature. And we use those funds, which is roughly $128 million a biennium. And we use those funds for different types of processes, ongoing obligations, that type of thing. So we created the OFSTA account. And the question is, well, what do we do with those funds? Because because of the budget cuts that are in the budget, and because of the actions taken by the governor from back in, starting in July, actually going back to March, we were able to balance the budget that we just presented to you without using OFSTA. So then the next question is, what do we do with the funds? So what this 314, what we created in the budget last year, and that was to direct portions of the OFSTA account in April of this year, and that's about $15 or $16 million roughly that would go to the LISRA and to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund. And then at the end of the biennium, the remainder of it would be, roughly $107 or $8 million would go to do the same thing. So it would go to 50% to the Permanent Trust Fund and 50% to the rainy day account, the LISRA. We put a hold on that. And the reason we put a hold on that was we said, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if we're going to have another outbreak of a COVID virus, or if a virus shows up that the Pfizer shot doesn't cover. And if it continues to just all of a sudden we have another issue. So the House side said, let's not deposit this yet. Let's keep this ready cash available, and we'll address this if and when we know that we're totally out of the woods. And then we can take the money and we can do different things with it. But in all probability, we'll either put it in LSRA or in the Permanent School Trust Fund, or the Common School Trust Fund for the schools, or the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, or we can use it for whatever this body decides in the future. And so we took this out, which was the automatic tip into those two accounts. And as you recall, I explained this earlier, that this was a 7-5 vote with the House side against our folks down the hall. And we know that they'll probably have a different opinion on this particular Section 300 when we get to conference committee. So, I would recommend that we kind of keep it where it's at, because we have more cards in our hand when we have this discussion. But ultimately, our ultimate goal is to go back to the way it used to be 6 years ago, and then before that. And that was, we take all of this 1% and we deposit it in either to the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund automatically until we need it again on another rainy day situation, or we split it up and use some of it to help address our education funding deficit. So happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on section 314? Absent any objection, section 314 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 320. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, this was a program that we passed last year. It was the Wyoming Works Program. It was $2.5 million, basically to retrain workers by providing grants and scholarships, as well as funding to the community colleges to perform the classes, and scholarships for disenfranchised workers to go to those classes. And this is just another example of, we'd love to do this program. And in fact, there's similar programs that are on the drawing board now. But because of our budgetary shortfalls, it was the executive's opinion and the appropriations position that we couldn't afford to do this. So it's being removed from the section 300s.
Any questions on section 320? Absent any objection, section 320 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 339. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For section 339, this is the Casper State Office Building Advisory Task Force, and this is an extension of the task force that's been in existence since we funded this project. And you'll note that this was also in the capital construction bill. We have it in two places just in case the capital construction bill does not go forward. As we've heard discussions throughout the last week or so, we've discussed how legislative members keeping oversight on these projects, such as the one in the west central part of the state, is also the southwestern corners of the state, have saved the state millions of dollars. And so keeping that legislative oversight is important. I'd point out on page 104, subsection M, that this does not go into effect if the capital construction bill or similar language passes. So that's all this does. I won't read to you everything that the task force is going to work on, but that's the issue, the motivation there. So if there's any questions, I'd gladly answer.
Any questions on section 339? Absent any objection, section 339 is closed. Next section for our consideration is section 399.
Okay.
Representative
Thank you,
Chairman
Mr. Chair.
Nicholas.
Folks, this is the last one. So this one's pretty simple. This is basically, it's a repealing certain actions that were taken. You can see that in Wyoming session laws. Section 327, we've already talked about. That's the $21.3 million that we took from LISRA to shore up the insurance pool, 21.3 million. That's the EGI. And now, as we discussed earlier, that fund now has $50 million surplus. So we're just drawing back that $21.3 million because we don't need it to shore up the insurance account. If you look at section 329, that was a section that we created. And in that section, we instructed the chief executive to cut at least $2 million in positions because we wanted him to work at reducing the size of state government. Well, in point of fact, because of the situation and because of this huge budget shortfall, the chief executive has cut out $38 million worth of positions. And so we no longer need that particular section. And the last one, section 330, that was a special fund of $250,000 that we set aside in the event of there was some type of a mass layoff at a coal mine or at some other location or some other large industrial facility around the state. And those dollars are no longer needed at this time as well. And so that's being repealed. So be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on section 399? Absent any objections, section 399 is closed. Representative Chairman Nicholas.
So, you know, this budgetary process is pretty awkward. You've got to sit and listen to us kind of walk through this. And I appreciate your patience. I know it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose, and you certainly get tired of our faces and our voices when we do this. But I just got to tell you, I've got a great crew. It's amazing how much time and effort these folks put into reviewing every single budget, interviewing every single director, department head, and just going through this process. And it's an amazing experience, just about learning about state government. And so for us that are on the committee, even though it's a lot of work, it's a lot of fun. And we develop a really neat relationship between each other. And the fun part starts now, because now we've got over 50 amendments that are coming up that we're going to be starting on addressing those amendments. And then you'll see us in it. We'll have more of our armor on when we move into that phase of this game, because our job is to protect our budget. And that's what we'll do. And so it's a fun part of this. And so I think we'll all have a little bit more fun when we get into the real debate on particular issues. But I want to thank my committee. So let's give them a round of applause. They did a great job. So also I'd like to thank the LSO staff that work with us. You know, we've got 2 or 3 of them working with us constantly, particularly Don Richards, who he's the know-all person of the state budget. So thank you, LSO staff, for all the work.
Chairman Nicholas, the members of the Appropriation Committee, thank you very much for your hard work. The question is on Chairman Nicholas's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill number 1 do pass. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The motion carries. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. Motion carries. Mr. Speaker.
Reading clerk, please read the Committee of the Whole report on House Bill 1.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee of the Whole, having had under consideration bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 1, do pass. Budget Bill Explanation, Section 1 through 49, Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman. In accordance with Joint Rule 14-1, further Committee of the Whole action will be continued until the next legislative day, 3/9/2021. Budget Bill Explanation, Section 51 through 339. Representative Burkhart, Chairman.
Chairman Burkhart.
Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of the Committee of the Whole report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Thank you, Chairman Burkhart. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House resolve itself in the Committee of the Whole.
You've heard the Majority Floor Leader's motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Chairman Burkhart.
Committee of the Whole will come to order. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm just going to really run over the Committee of the Whole list real quick. It is what is on the internet. We'll run till 5 o'clock. It's House Bill 67, House Bill 150, House Bill 160, House Bill 14, House Bill 179, House Bill 122, House Bill 112, House Bill 109, House Bill 144.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. First bill for our consideration is House Bill 67. Oh, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So members, I just want to remind you, hour and 10 minutes until your amendments are due. And if you plan to, if you're withdrawing amendments, that would be helpful too, so that staff can move on to ones that are fresh and ready to go. So please turn in your amendments. You have 1 hour and 10 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
First bill for our consideration is House Bill 67. The reading clerk will please read the bill.
House Bill 67. Sponsored by Harshman, Geothermal Energy Review, an act relating to administration of government. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2 appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 67, Geothermal Energy Review, respectful report, same back to the House with recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Skinner, Larson, Floyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stith, Walters. Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. Chairman Nicholas.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Greer.
Mr. Chairman, which bill was just read in?
I'm sorry, Chairman, I can't hear you. 67.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, 67 was heard by the Minerals Committee.
Right. I
Referred to-
apologize. Representative Greer. Chairman Greer.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, do we need to read the vote from the Minerals Committee?
The reading clerk will read the bill.
Three referred to. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 9, Minerals, Business and Economic Development, to whom is referred House Bill 67, Geothermal Energy Review. Respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Bear, Burkhart, Duncan, Air, Gray, Greer, Heiner, Sherwood, Western. Representative Greer, Chairman.
Representative Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises report to do so with the recommendation that House Bill 67 do pass. Mr. Chairman, I'll further move the standing committee amendment by a desire to turn both the explanation of the amendments and the bill over to the good Chairman of Revenue.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, House Bill 67 is a study bill during a time of budget austerity. And normally we would put a couple members of each chamber on a bill like this, drive up the cost more. And so really what I tried to do, and if you'll think back to a bill that passed through both bodies, was signed into law during our 8-day virtual session and was really an energy authority bill that defines some more energy authority type projects that would qualify. And this body amended into that, this pumped hydro and geothermal piece. And really this bill out here is a geothermal energy review. And Wyoming has tremendous resources. And again, I'm not talking about Thermopolis or Yellowstone. We're talking about many of our tens of thousands of drilled wells already in the state. So then as over the last month and a half, we've learned more and what's happened with our new administration and some of these areas of emphasis. And one of them then is hydrogen. And Wyoming really stands, there's a tremendous federal subsidy out there. We already have folks in our state kind of moving in this direction. And so we responded really by amending this bill to include, to be more broad and to bring in a couple other experts really. And so really the bill then, you'll see this long standing committee amendment, but really most of it does, it inserts after geothermal, hydro related and hydrogen related. And really you'll see that throughout the entire bill. We add another another person to this group. And really, it's about getting some really smart people in Wyoming together to talk about these possibilities. And again, I've given examples of other times we've done this, is particularly in nuclear energy, is we're an agreement state now because of that process. And so we're on this new frontier of all the above. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd move for the standing committee amendment, and then I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions on the standing committee amendment? Question having been called, all those in favor of standing committee amendment number 1 to House Bill 67, please say aye. All opposed, no. Standing committee amendment number 1 has been adopted. We're back on the bill.
Question?
Question having been called, all those in favor of Chairman Greer's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report to do so with a recommendation that House Bill 67 do pass, please say aye. All opposed, no. House Bill 67 has passed committee of the whole. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 150. The reading clerk will please read the bill.
House Bill 150, sponsored by Appropriations, State Budgeting and Expenditure Authority. An act relating to public funds and administration of government. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2 Appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 150, State Budgeting and Expenditure Authority, respectfully report same back to the House with recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Kinner, Larson Lloyd, Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stith, Walters. Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee of the whole rise and report, it does so with the recommendation that House Bill 150 do pass. And I would turn the explanation of the bill, which is a brilliant bill, by the way, and please place close attention, and the standing committee amendment to the good representative from Fremont County.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the House, yesterday, or maybe the day before, I sent you a couple of opinions. One was an LSO opinion, and one was an opinion from a former Attorney General that talked about the chief executive, whose name we will not mention, starts with the G, that we'll be referring to a lot in this conversation. And in these opinions, there was an opinion from the Attorney General that when unrestricted funds came in from the state government, that was a transaction between the federal government and whose name we will not mention, and he could do with those funds as he wished and didn't require any legislative action. LSO, same day that was released, come back and says, oh, we disagree. Constitution is very clear that any funds deposited in the treasurer has to have, is appropriated by the legislature. And so that kind of a little bit of a difference of opinion has existed for a period of time since 2003. Since I've been on the Appropriations Committee, there has been some conversation about this. And so as you read these two opinions, and they're great reads. It's not lonesome dove great, but it really is fun to read. It really helps you understand the positions that exist between the executive branch and perhaps the legislature. So then this year, as we had these federal funds come through the CARES Act, the question was, who or how can these funds be distributed, what programs? And there was when I say argument, not a heated argument, but there was a debate that says, well, there is this opinion that says the governor could, whose name we will not mention, can do with these funds as he wishes. Pushback was, yeah, but if they're deposited in the treasury, it requires legislative approval. Fortunately, we have a legislature and an executive branch that get along, and not all states have that, but we do. And at the end of the day, he whose name we will not mention called us into an executive or into a special session. Our committee number 10 drafted some incredible bills. We passed those out and took those CARES funds, really intending to serve the well-being of the citizens of the state, businesses and healthcare and otherwise. But this really tripped again a trigger that has existed, and the chairman of the appropriations on both sides says we really need to fix this and give some further direction on what is done, because he whose name we will not mention, even, as he was looking, we talked about in our budget presentation, can he take SIPA dollars and move them to fund major maintenance, or are those restricted inside? Or can he whose name we will not mention take reserve account? And that kind of makes us a little anxious, but it was kind of concluded that maybe he couldn't, but it is not clear. And so what this bill is intended to do is to put some sideboards on and to give clear statutory guidance on what happens when the governor, when he whose name we will not mention goes through the B11 process, and when we have unrestricted funds that come into the state. As I reached out to our good executive chief officer and told him that we had this bill and wanted to work with his agency on it, the question was, do we need this? And frankly, the answer to that is not with you, because we get along. But what happens in the future when that's not always the case? We need to have something in place. So as we work through this bill, we've had representatives from the executive branch as well as LSO and a subcommittee that was created by our chairman to work through this. And so what the intent of the bill really does is, in the B11 process, so in 9.2.10.005, subchapter B, little b, Roman and II, that's where we get the B11. It authorizes he whose name we will not mention to, in circumstances, to move money around within from agency to agency. Then he has to report it. Then it also goes in B3 and talks about how he handles federal funds. And so what we're saying is the current language says that he could move other funds. So what are other funds? Well, could that be reserve account? Could that be other? We're going to define that. And we're going to say, and we're going to refer back and give clear definition that when we take money from one pot to move it to another, that it has to be identified from whence it came and to where it's going to go. If there's federal money coming in, and you see in the budget bill where we approve an increase of federal dollars, or we approve federal dollars, like in the Department of that oversees health, that's still an appropriative process. And so if you've got, for example, this last year in the CARES Act, we had an increase of the FMAP rate. That was an increase of federal dollars that we approved to be used, but it was designated for programs already defined. And so in 10.05B3 on those government funds, we're saying that he can already do that, accept those funds if they've got a home. But if they're unrestricted, if they come from manna from heaven and there's no place for them to go, that there's a process that we need to be included in to define where they go. And in essence, what we're saying is when they come, that we want the Appropriations Committee to look at them and see if the intent of the governor seems reasonable, and then report back to the President of the Senate and Speaker of the House what we think. And if it appears that it's something that really warrants this body as a whole, that our recommendation would be to have a special session, then leadership on both sides would poll all of us, bring all of us into the picture and identify whether we think a special session is warranted or not. If there's an agreement that we do, like we did last time, then we would call a special session, identify how we want these programs to work. And that's what we do. Now, I'd like to take you to the very last page of the bill and talk about the repealers, if I may. And these are kind of important. The first one is that we repeal 92-1005E, which are some definitions that are relevant to emergency uses, and we put them back into 92-10002, which is the definition for the whole act. So we don't get rid of them, we just move them to another location. 94209 is repealed. This is an interesting section of our statutes because this provides for the governor's emergency expenditures if there's a need. And it requires us, the legislature, to appropriate dollars for emergency for an emergency or unanticipated requirements. We haven't been doing that. Why? Well, I'll ask you. Why haven't we? But we haven't. And it's not a requirement. It doesn't give a dollar amount. It doesn't. We've done it a couple of times. And so we're going to take care of that in this bill too, but that's what the repealers are, and they're pretty important. If I could, I would like, Mr. Chairman, I would like to move the standing committee amendment, which, as I told you, or it's really the heart of it is on page 20, lines 1, on page 20, where we add some new language that says that the committee, meaning the JC, this is in regards to dollars that come in that are unrestricted, that we're trying to decide if the governor's plan is appropriate or if the legislature should come into special session. And the committee, meaning joint appropriations, shall vote whether to recommend the legislature should meet the special session pursuant to Wyoming Constitution, Article 3, Section 7, to consider the acceptance or expenditures of the federal funds. Upon receipt of the committee's recommendation, the presiding officers of each house shall initiate a poll to the members of the legislature in accordance with the rules of the legislature for calling itself into special session. The governor may not accept or expend the funds until the earlier of the certification of the president of the Senate or the Speaker of the House, or 40 days after the governor has submitted his request. So it puts a requirement on the legislature to move and a requirement on the governor to move. Now, this House Standing Committee amendment is a result of LSO staff looking at the draft as you have it in your hands on page 20 and a little bit back on 10, where we went through management council. Management council had JAC meet, then we come back to management council, and they thought that was perhaps stretching our authority just a little bit and recommended that we move it to that. So, Mr. Chairman, with that in mind, I would move that House Standing Committee, and if there's questions, I would answer them further. If not, I'd call for the question on the Standing Committee amendment.
Any questions on the Standing Committee amendment? Question having been called, all those in favor of Standing Committee Amendment number 1, please say aye. All opposed, no. Standing Committee Amendment number 1 has been adopted. We are back on the bill.
So committee, kind of going through the bill, and I really kind of explained it in a nutshell. I'd like you to turn to page I'm looking here, there it is, on page 3 at the bottom, where we go into the definitions. This is where we brought the new definition in, but we do something here is we put a new definition in. We bring the definitions for budget in, but then on Page 6, we bring in a definition for a public welfare emergency, meaning a sudden financial calamity or other occurrences, either of which was not foreseeable or demands immediate attention, perhaps an irrigation tunnel collapsing, something of that nature, a canyon where the wind and the river go through, closes, something to those effects, or for which other funds are not available for expenditures. And that is a definition of a public welfare emergency. And then we create a section that deals with that in 9.2.10.14.3 or 0.2, I'm sorry. Or no, 0.3. So now in our statutes, we have two areas that the governor can work in. One that we added last year in 2020 in House Bill 29, which requires the governor, and we created 9.2.10.14.2 for a budget shortfall. And then we have this one that talks about the emergency that I can never remember the name of that thing, a public welfare emergency. And then we say that on page 7, when we get into the B11 process, that on the non-federal funds, that he whose name we will not mention, has to identify as illustrated, as brought out in 9.4.204T, he has to identify which agency or classification of agency funds he's moving around in that B11 process. That's new. And it's kind of a big deal. And then we also point out in last year's bill that any B11 process over $100,000, he whose name we will not mention's office has to let the legislature know. Then we go to, and it's important that before he can do that B11 process, there's 4 conditions that qualify. It has to be a public welfare emergency that we just identified. General fund appropriations cannot be conserved. An agency program requirements have significantly changed, or unanticipated fund revenues have come available to qualify non-restricted funds that we refer to. Mr. Chairman, we authorize the B11 process to handle a public welfare emergency. We talked about in this body that the governor has flex authority to move things around on page 10. He can move funds from the general fund in one program by line authority within the Legislative Appropriation Act to be used by another program. That's a flex authority that I think we started in maybe 2016. No federal funds. Then we get to the point that no federal funds can be used. And if you look at the new language on 11, that's where we talk about the requirements that he has to do in order to use federal funds as they come in. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I would answer any questions.
Seeing no one at the mics and question being called, all those in favor of Chairman Nicholas's recommendation that when the committee of the whole rise to report, it do so with a recommendation that House Bill 150 do pass, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. House Bill 150 is passed committee of the whole. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 160.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nicholas,
Privilege of the floor, please.
proceed.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Landon Wilkinson, who's up with our Catherine Wilkinson, who's a lobbyist here in town, and he's up there listening and taking notes copiously, and he's got a new pair of sunglasses. Hey, Landon.
Reading clerk will read the bill, please.
House Bill 160, sponsored by Representative Burt, election ballot order, an act relating to elections. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 7, corporations, elections, and political subdivisions, to whom was referred House Bill 160, election ballot order, respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation to do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Blackburn, Clifford, Duncan, Air, Roscoe, Swanitzer. Noes, Representatives Clausen, Hunt, McGuire. Representative Swanitzer, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Chairman Swanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee of the whole rise to report it, do so with the recommendation that House Bill 160 do pass. I would further move the standing committee amendment. And before I turn over the management of the bill, I'm going to ask you to vote no on the standing committee amendment, which is highly irregular. But ladies and gentlemen, the standing committee amendment was brought to us from the bill sponsor. And after further investigation, the language wasn't quite right in the statutory references. So it's my understanding the bill sponsor has a committee of the whole amendment, which is a rewrite of the standing committee amendment. And I thought it was cleaner to work off of that. So, Mr. Chairman, I would do an immediate question on the standing committee amendment and ask you to vote no.
Question on the standing committee amendment being called. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Standing committee amendment number 1 has failed adoption.
And
Representative Chairman Swanitzer.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then I would turn it over to our good third-party member of the House for explanation of the bill.
Representative Burt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick breakdown of what this is for. So thank you for allowing me to present the bill. In the current political climate, there's a strong appetite for legislation that improves the fairness and integrity of our elections. This legislation gives Wyoming the opportunity to lead the effort to improve our elections in a unified and equitable way. When I was fortunate enough to present this bill to the committee, I was joined by world-renowned experts on what is called ballot order effect. And ballot order effect is the electoral impact caused by the position of a candidate's name and how it appears on the ballot. Over 1,000 studies have been conducted on this phenomenon, and over 85% of those studies have come to firm conclusions that a candidate's name appearing first on the ballot improves final results by anywhere between 2 and 10% of the vote. If the code is not secure enough, it allows for the opportunity to easily manipulate results. I want to be clear, I'm in no doubt. I'm not doubting the integrity of our clerks, but the current language does allow the possibility that it could be done the way that is currently written. After reviewing current Wyoming election code, it appears that there are 3 different statutes that contradict one another. So while this bill does address fairness and integrity of our elections, it also becomes a cleanup bill that gives clear directives to our county clerks and election officials and allows them to conduct fair and secure elections. Dr. John Krosnick from Stanford University, Dr. Josh Pasek from University of Michigan, and Dr. Darren Grant from San Houston State University testified to the Corporations Committee and provided information on ample research.
Representative, I will caution you on the use of persons' names, please. and
Sorry,
places.
Mr. Chairman, I
Thank
was
you.
just corrected by my fellow colleague here. I do apologize. Those doctors, they did testify in the Corporations Committee and provided information on the ample research that shows an inherent bias from ballot order. Yesterday morning, I emailed you all some information shared by one of these doctors, along with the testimony provided by the committee with the YouTube link. One of the witnesses testified that he has been called in as an expert witness in several states in successful, costly lawsuits resulting in the court-mandated changes to the election procedure. The work concluded that much like taking a multiple choice test
Voters who are less informed or uneducated or undecided with their choices will select the first option on the ballot, which skews election results. Oh, sorry. This bill rotates the order in which names appear on the ballot to ensure that each candidate's name appears an equal number of times in each position in their race. This nullifies the impact of ballot order effect. And according to testimony by the County Clerks Association and our election officials at the top, thanks to uniform ballot machines in each county, this can logistically be accomplished at no increased cost to either the state or the county. This is a practical fix that ensures election integrity and fairness and protects Wyoming for potentially costly lawsuits. This is also a tripartisan piece of legislation. Legislators from all political ideologies have signed on to this bill. So with that, I'd like to go into the bill along with the Committee of the Whole amendments. Do I need to move that? Okay.
Representative, are you going to move the Committee of the Whole amendment at this time?
Okay. Mr. Chairman, let's see here. I move that when the Committee of the Whole. Okay. I move that move the Committee of the Whole amendment number 1 on House Bill number 160.
Any questions on Committee of the Whole amendment? If you would explain it, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to make this as simple as I can. So we're looking at 3 different statutes. I've got 22-6-120, 121, and 122, all relating with the election, the process. So we look at the amendment first. I'll try to read the amendment along with the bill because they'll go hand in hand here. If you look at going along page 1 on line 7, we're just inserting some of the current statutes and where they represent. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Guess I'm a little loud. We're looking at page 1, line 7. We want to insert a change to the statute 226-120, the format of the general election ballot. You can look at that. We want to remove the separate columns. That's going to be on line 16. Also page 1, and then page 1, line 19 through 24. After the row, we want to strike out that little section in there. And what this does is it removes the prioritization or the separate columns of the different candidates and the different parties. Moving down the amendment on, let's see, page 2, line 6. This will put us back onto the original bill. So if we look at the bill on page 2, line 6, after election ballot, we want to insert the name, we want the verbiage, the names of ahead of candidates. And then on line 7, we want to add after shall be rotated as set forth in Wyoming statute 22-6-22. So that section will actually read, and we're done, for the general election ballot, the names of candidates shall be rotated as set forth in Wyoming statute 22-6-122. And the rest of that section of 121 would actually be crossed out. What that actually is going to do is it's going to kind of reset the prioritization of political party first on the partisan side of it. And what that'll actually do is allow, when you look into section 122, which I'll go into here in a second, it's just removing the partisan side of where you're positioned, and it allows for all the names and all the candidates and all the races to be randomized. Going back to the Committee of the Whole amendments, looking at the 22-6-122, the rotation of candidates' names equal to lines in the voting machines. So the conflict here is the way that the current statutes sit on the 121 statute and the 122 statute that conflict each other. So 121 tells us that our race or our candidates have to be set up by partisan party. But then 122 tells us they're going to be randomized or they're going to be rotated. So the two can't work with each other. So then what 22 does is it removes it adds verbiage to remove the general election on on the rotation for by precinct, but then it adds in during the general election, the name of all candidates shall be rotated without reference by precinct. Some of the things, we do have a precinct within our voting constituents that have one particular precinct. So the way that the current statute is set up, not all precincts can be rotated within that. If I'm explaining that right, it may be kind of confusing. If I do, please ask questions. I'll try to explain how that works out. So if the current law is sets up is that if we require all of our precincts to rotate all candidates by that precinct, and there's only one precinct within that voting block, then our county clerks can't actually rotate the names. You get one ballot with one set of names, the way it's set up from start to finish for all the voting blocks. So trying to clean up the way that's verbed, or the way it's got the verbiage on that. Kind of where I'm at. Yes, sir.
We are in standing committee amendment of the whole, or I'm sorry, committee of the whole amendment number 1 to House Bill 160. Are there any questions? Representative Chairman Zwanasser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not as much a question, it's just a comment in my support of the amendment. As somebody who is last name at the end of the alphabet all the time, how the current system works now is if you have an even number of precincts, you're fine. If you have an odd number of precincts, and like I do, right, more often than not, I will be the second name on the ballot. So the ballot order effect is a real thing, and it was pretty impressive, something I studied in my master's program. And one of the books I read, actually the guy's testifying to me from a very prestigious school on the West Coast. So that was awesome. But why I like this and why you should like this, even if you do have an alphabetical name that's in the beginning of the alphabet, so precincts aren't all the same size. So it's not necessarily fair if, you know, some precincts that are 3 times larger than other precincts, your name's first in the ballot. And I've seen this effect in 9 races, depending which precincts. It's usually like a 2%. I like to think that my precincts are pretty demographically the same. And so I think this is a much fairer way. Technology has allowed us to be able to do it this way. And I would strongly encourage your support of the amendment and the bill.
No other discussion on the committee of the whole amendment? And question having been called, all in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Okay. Committee of the whole amendment number 1 is passed. We are back on the bill. Any discussion on the bill? Question having been called, all those in favor of Chairman Zwanitser's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report, it do so with a recommendation that House Bill 60 do pass, please say aye. All opposed, no. House Bill 160 has passed committee of the whole. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 14.
House Bill 14, sponsored by corporations. Rights of way along public ways amendments. An act relating to rights of ways. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 7, corporations, elections, and political subdivisions, to whom is referred House Bill 14, rights of way along public ways amendments. Respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Blackburn, Clausen, Clifford, Duncan, Air, Hunt, McGuire, Roscoe, Zwanitzer. Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman.
What is your pleasure, Representative Zwanitzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee of the whole rise to report to do so with the recommendation that House Bill 14 do pass. I would further move the standing committee amendment number 1 and turn over explanation of the bill and the standing committee amendment to the good Vice Chairman of Transportation.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to explain the bill and then move the standing committee amendment at the end of the explanation. So what this is it's an addition to Wyoming Statute 126.813, which is a statute that has been on the books for a very long time and has been working just fine. What it does is it allows for public utilities and companies that are working for the public utilities to put infrastructure along public byways so long as they have the permission of either the entity, the city, the town, or the county.
So what happened is, as things have been changing and as we have had some strong requests to increase our broadband facilities, some questions have come up whether or not broadband would fall within the statute. So what this bill does is it specifically adds broadband into that. So if you go to page 2 of the bill, the first change is persons, and that's because corporations have now expanded into including different types of entities. Persons is the language that is commonly used. It also conforms with the same language found in line number 11 of this bill. So it goes on and it talks about, this is the original statute, talking about public utilities, communication companies, and their subcontractors working within these public areas and constructing infrastructure for the benefit of the people. The new language starts at line number 16, and it talks about applications for construction permits and licenses for broadband facilities. And that's the change, again, broadband facilities. And it talks about government property, public right-of-way, appropriate public entities. And again, we are talking about these public entities are going to be cities, towns, and primarily counties. If you go to the next page of the bill, it talks about the process of submitting these applications. And the initial draft of the bill had a application and an answer not less than 30 days. We had testimony in the committee that a lot of these small towns, they don't have a full-time engineering staff, so they may have to hire or borrow an engineer. That takes some time. Also, most of these small cities and towns, the approval doesn't come from the engineering area, it would come from the council. And many of these small towns and cities only meet once a month. So they would need 60 days in order to have the application submitted, have it reviewed, have it worked on, and then have it be approved by the board, and then returned back to the entity that's asking for it. And everyone agreed that 60 days was a standard and a fair window of opportunity. That change was also made on line number 8, where the response time was 45 days. That was changed to 60 days to be to conform with the above change. And then on line number 9, all of the language after application was taken out, and that's because the way that it was originally written, it was set forth that if you made an application and there wasn't a response within the now 60-day window, that it would automatically be deemed that it had been approved. And all of the entities, especially the counties, said, oh, no, we can't do that, because what if it comes in and just, it gets dropped? Sometimes these things happen and you may have to be reminded. Again, we're talking about some really small municipalities, some small entities that have a very limited number on their staff, and everybody has to be given an opportunity to work these things. So that language, it was agreed by all parties. That language was taken out, so that is part of the standing committee amendment. It then goes down to later on in line or page 3. If you go down to line number 18, cable operator definition was taken out, and then line number 22, after protocol, one of our good corporate citizens who is a company that installs this type of infrastructure but doesn't fall under the traditional guideline of being either a cable operator or a communication company, they asked for the to insert on page 3, line 22, the following language: for purposes of this section only, and notwithstanding any other provisions of law, a communications company, including a cable operator, is defined in 47 USC 522, paragraph 5, provided the cable operator provides any of the services listed in this subsection. And so that language was inserted in order to, at the behest of that particular company, and they feel that that will be satisfactory and entitle them to the benefits of this bill as they install broadband infrastructure around the state. Then also on line number 4, it goes on to state that nothing in this section shall authorize a communication company to set or install permanent towers along, across, or under any of the public roads, streets, or waters of the state. Again, that is unless they have submitted an application and received proper permitting from that entity. And also be construed to prohibit a city, town, or county from requiring a franchise before issuing any permits, licenses, or authorizations as provided by this section. Back in the day, when I was growing up, when there were cable companies and everybody was trying to jump on the bandwagon, some of these small towns demanded a franchise so that they could quote unquote get a piece of the action. And we don't do that anymore. So things have changed a little bit. There was one other final request, and that is on page 4, line number 6, to include the language or set poles, because there was some semantics going on, and some people said, well, this doesn't include towers, but that doesn't mean that we can't put a pole. Well, you know, what's the difference between a pole or a tower? The best thing is to just include the language within the bill so that there's no question and nobody can come up with that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would move the standing committee, and barring any questions, call for the question on the standing committee amendment.
Representative Majority Floor Leader Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. On in support of the bill, I think this is a bill that came out of our broadband task.
Representative, we're on the standing committee amendment.
Yep,
Okay.
I'm going to get there. This is a bill, Mr. Chairman, this is a bill that came out of our broadband task force. And so and I am on the standing committee amendment, and specifically on the changes that really probably gutted the idea behind the bill. And so really the idea was to shorten up the timeframes so we can get broadband projects in place. It's always a question, do you go, you know, how much time should you allow local government to do their thing? And then what should you do to narrow that up? And so that the timeframes you saw in there were the timeframes we put in. I'm willing to negotiate those. And then the teeth were kind of taken out. In other words, if you don't get the application done in time, it had in there, then it's approved. So basically the teeth were taken out, and the times were extended. I am not going to go into a long debate on this now because I don't want to kill more bills on committee of the whole, but I do want to say this, and then probably in some other reading, I will make a run at this standing committee amendment. Parts of it are okay, but I'm not going to go through dividing it right now and have that debate right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On an ambivalent on the standing committee amendment.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and in favor of the amendment. All the parties came to the table. There was a lot of conversation. The entities who come to the table, to the municipalities who originally wanted to have this, if the municipalities didn't respond, they wanted you to automatically be approved. The entities immediately were against that, because if you didn't respond, you shouldn't automatically get approval. So there was an impasse. And so this was the compromise. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces when you're trying to get these permits approved. So the 45 days was the 45 and a 60, I believe, is what we came up with. So this was the compromise, and everybody had a seat at the table. So the entities that were trying to get these permits and the municipalities that were approving these permits. So rather than just going through, one of the options was, rather than just absolutely denying those permits and having to start the process all over, this was the compromise. So on and in favor.
Any other discussion on standing committee amendment? Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering a little bit of clarification. You said, or what I heard, if you would just clarify it for me, that we don't require franchises anymore, or that was something that was from in the past. but it looks to me as though that this is in here requiring a franchise. So could you just explain that for me, please? Thank you.
We're on the standing committee amendment. Okay. Right. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going back. So again, the language is nothing shall be construed to prohibit a city, town, or county from requiring a franchise before issuing any permits. But that doesn't mean that a franchise that's existing cannot go on. Again, that's kind of some murky language, and I would have to research it a little bit further before I gave a final answer on that. So.
Chairman Harshman, are you? Okay, thank you. Any other discussion on standing committee amendment number 1? Question having been called, all in favor of standing committee amendment number 1, please say aye. All opposed, no. Standing committee amendment number 1 has been adopted. We are back on the bill. Any further discussion on the bill? Question having been called, all those in favor of Representative Zwan, excuse me, Chairman Zwan's motion that when Committee of the Whole rise to report, to do so with a recommendation that House Bill 14 do pass, please say aye. All opposed, no. House Bill 14 has passed Committee of the Whole. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 179.
House Bill 179, sponsored by Representative Zawanitzer. Optional municipal tax election, an act relating to taxation and revenue. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 7, corporations, elections, and political subdivisions, to whom is referred House Bill 179, optional municipal tax election, respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Blackburn, Clausen, Clifford, Duncan, Air, Hunt, McGuire, Roscoe, Zwanitzer. Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. Chairman Zwanitzer, what is your pleasure?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move in the Committee of the Whole rise report to do so with the recommendation that House Bill 179 do pass. There are no standing committee amendments, and I will turn it over to myself to explain the bill. Those of us who were here last year, you'll remember it was an interim revenue committee bill on allowing municipalities to put forth a sales and use tax under very specific parameters. That bill got a lot of debate in both bodies. It actually went to the second conference committee, and when it returned and we voted for it, there apparently is some disagreement and statutory prohibitions on at least what many of us thought we were voting for with a complicated second conference committee. So just to quickly refresh how these work, this would be the allowability for your municipality to implement its own sales and use tax, either what in my county would be called a 5th penny general, 6th penny specific, 7th penny economic development. And those are interchangeable depending on where you live. And so the two ways to allow a municipality to do so, one is if a county has already affirmatively put one of those taxes, one of those sales taxes, or any percentage thereof, a quarter, a half, or 1, before the voters, and it's been approved. So under scenario 1, if your county has put on one of those sales tax provisions, any municipality can then go to their voters and say, we would like a similar sales tax of equal or lesser value. So let's say you have a general purpose, your county's approved. The municipalities could say, we'd also like a general purpose of a quarter, a half, or up to 1 cent. Under the law, that expires when your county's sales tax expires. So that's provision 1. And what we're really trying to address here, you can see how that would be problematic if your county at a general election puts on let's say a specific purpose tax. Then the cities would have to wait 2 years before they could bring it to the next general election 2 years later. But then it's also time limited. And obviously the amount of revenue you would receive is so much smaller in most cases in counties because of that municipality being a subset of your county. So that's segment one that we're really trying to address here is that, let's say your county put on a tax measure the voters voted for, then your city could come at the usual three areas being the first, a primary election, first week in May, November or August, I believe, and then could go before the voters and ask for a similar lesser value tax to be put on. The second way contemplated in statute is your county doesn't want to put on a specific purpose or a general purpose. Two of our counties don't have a general purpose, but the municipalities really want a general purpose for roads or a specific purpose tax for projects. Currently, they can petition the county commissioners to say, we know you don't want to put a general or a county-wide sales and use tax on the ballot, but we could really use it here in our community, like mine, in Cheyenne, and we think we'd have the votes for it. The county commissioners by resolution can basically grant that authority for a municipality to proceed. The issues we've been having historically, especially, I think I can just use Lincoln County as an example. They've tried, I think, 3 times now, and correct me if I'm wrong, the representative from that county, to put a county-wide on the ballot, and it's always failed. But in all the precincts in southern Lincoln County, which as many of you know is demographically very different than northern Lincoln County, it always passes and pretty high margins. However, that has never been implemented. And so you could have a municipality like the county seat of southern Lincoln County could get permission from the county commissioners to be able to try to put it on as a municipal tax for roads for specific purposes. So I know that's a long explanation. The heart of the bill and our sales and use tax laws, you'll see that it's in all of our statutes, we put on a sales provision and then a use provision. So we duplicate statutes. So if anyone's wondering, why is there 2 different imposition statutes? That's how we write all of our tax laws for sales tax. But it really allows your municipality under either of those provisions, when they believe they have a project the voters will approve, right? Because it costs them a lot of money to bring that forward. They can put it on the ballot and not wait 2 years when they're given that authority to do so. So that is a bill for forward change and a very long explanation. Be happy to answer questions.
Representative Washut.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. My question has to do with the voter turnout for these primary elections. Usually they're less, sometimes there's an exception, but typically they're much smaller turnout for your primaries and for your general election. So that concerns me greatly. And I'd just like to have your thought and what the committee heard in terms of the justification for taking these votes before a primary election where not as many people show up.
Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, I'm not trying to pull over anything on anyone here. I think it's very commonly known that a larger number of voters show up to a general election, and those voters in general elections tend not to be as favorable for tax increases. And so when you do have, let's say, a sales and use tax on the ballot that's not at a general election, at a primary or one of the other times, you just need a majority of the people who show up to vote for that to pass. And so, yeah, your threshold of the number of voters who show up in a special called election, so we can call them, tends to have a lower voter turnout. But certainly the people who are frequent voters and who are most passionate for or against that issue will turn out. So the good vice chairman's correct. Lower voter turnout, arguably then a higher propensity of this project or a general purpose for a road is up. Less people show up, arguably a higher likelihood that it would pass. Yes.
Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question I got is, and this needs to be explained a little more. They can do special bond elections on this, correct? Is that the way I'm taking this?
Representative or Chairman Zwanitzer.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this statutory change only concerns sales and use tax under those 2 provisions, right? Bond elections are separate, and they couldn't do that now at the times they want to. So this would better mirror the allowability of your municipalities when they do bond elections. So yeah, certainly, I mean, if there's a worthwhile project that your municipality really wanted, they could try to bond for it. This is just another tool in the toolbox, especially right now with some bills coming over that are hurtful to funding of your municipalities, that this is a greater allowability for them to say, yeah, we took a hit from the state, but there's a specific need for better roads or specific projects or economic development. And we believe we have the will of the voters on our side to put this forth, and they would bring it forth. So, you know, there's lots of different protections for, I would say, the people in here who get antsy about anything to do with tax. You still have to have either a vote of the county, or you have to have a vote of the county commissioners to specifically allow that municipality to go forth.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really want to urge a no vote on this bill, and I appreciate the frankness of the chairman of corporations on what the effects of this are. I mean, we shouldn't be, as a body, gaming around when the turnout's lower or whatever. That's the wrong thing to do. I mean, the general election's the highest turnout. These are very important decisions. The concept behind them is that it's basically a plebiscite, a decision of the electorate on this. And in keeping with that, we should want these on the ballot, if they're going to be on the ballot, when there's the highest turnout. And I'm not saying I'm for them on the ballot, but if they're going to be on the ballot, they should be when it's the highest turnout. And I think this was a decision the body made last year, and now they're coming back trying to change it. And I appreciate the chairman of corporations' frankness there on what happens with this bill. And so I just urge a no vote. You know, I don't want to belabor it, but conceptually, you know, there's bills it's a no. And I think this is a no. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Question having been called, we are on House Bill 179.
Can I get
All
one?
in favor, please say aye. Oh,
Aye.
Representative Chairman Zwanitzer, I apologize.
If I could just have one more shot at it, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
And
please. I apologize.
No, I understand it's a problem I'm trying to fix. So if allowing it whenever is not up to the body's will, maybe I would be happy to bring an amendment for primary and general. But I would say we have a statute that was agreed upon last year that is just really not able to be implemented because of this 2-year time delay out of every general election. So perhaps calling them whenever they want is too flexible for us. I would remind you, there's a cost to doing this, and you don't put these forward lightly. I would certainly hope no municipality would, right? Because they'll earn the wrath of their voters if it goes down and they spend money on it. But if there's some language that we can tighten it up to, you know, once a year, not be able to do it too often, I'm certainly amenable to that. So if you feel strongly, come talk to me. I'll try to fix it. You can still vote no on third reading if I can't make it better. But if you go talk to municipalities, everybody's hurting for money right now, and we have a tool in the toolbox that they can't adequately use, that they're asking the flexibility to be able to use. So I would encourage your support on committee of the whole and see what we can do.
Any other discussion on House Bill 179? Chairman Flintner, are you waiting? Okay. Question having been called, all those in favor of Chairman Zwanitzer's motion, when the committee of the whole rise to report, it do so with a recommendation that House Bill 179 do pass, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. House Bill 179 is passed committee of the whole. Division having been called, all those in favor, please stand. All those opposed, please stand. 32 to 25. As I said, House Bill 79 passes. Next bill for our consideration is House Bill 122. Reading clerk will please read the bill.
House Bill 122, sponsored by Representative Western, hunting and fishing access, reliable funding, an act relating to game and fish. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom is referred House Bill 122, hunting and fishing access, reliable funding. Respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Banks, Hunt, Knapp, Newsom, Sweeney, Winter. Noes, Representatives Flitner, Haroldson, Jennings. Representative Newsom, Vice Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Chairman Flitner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 122 do pass, and I further move the adoption of the Standing Committee Amendment. And for an explanation of both the bill and the amendment, I will pass it off to the good representative who lives just over the big hill from me in House District 51.
Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you want me to dispatch with also the Committee of the Whole amendment as well?
Handle it however you can't. It's not your amendment.
Mr. Chairman, so I'll start off.
Haroldson, do you wish to move Committee of the Whole Amendment number 1 or wait?
Mr. Chairman, I've already moved the Standing Committee Amendment. Let's go with that first.
Okay, thank you. We're on Standing Committee Amendment number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So basically what the amendment does, a couple of minor word changes. It just simply says that the Game and Fish does not have to spend this annually. It also just includes some of the, if you look on page, what is that? On page 3, it just includes that some of this money can be used for some of the stream improvements, fish ladder, stuff like that. So basically, this is what the bill does. I know we're all tired and I'll try to really hammer through this. And
Do you want to handle the Standing Committee Amendment or do you want to explain the bill before we vote?
what's that? I'm about to explain the bill.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, so basically what this bill does, if you ask all the hunters in Wyoming to name some of their biggest issues, almost without exception, they're going to say public access is one of them. So this bill addresses that and addresses it by raising the price of the conservation stamp by $9, puts that in a dedicated fund that Game and Fish has to use to spend on some of these access agreements on the current existing access programs that are already on the books. So again, this isn't creating any new programs or anything. This is simply just funding the programs that are on the books. And specifically, whether it be walking areas or hunter management areas, these are things that landowners can negotiate between Game and Fish. They can name the terms, the price that they want to accept, and it's absolutely not obligatory. It is strictly optional for landowners. That's the programs. This bill just simply funds those things that are already on the books. These are already tools in the toolbox that Game and Fish has. This just simply funds them because again, I think the stat that really tells it all is 95% of hunters rely on public land for successful harvests. So this is a really important thing for successful harvest to happen in Wyoming. We all know hunting is a big part of our heritage, and this is something that helps preserve that. So please vote aye, and I stand for any questions.
Okay, we are in Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to House Bill 122. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. We are back on the bill. Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the bringer of the bill could remind me what the cost of a lifetime conservation stamp is, that would help me. It's been a long time since I bought mine.
Mr. Chairman, so
continue.
Mr. Chairman, so if it's just the stamp alone, I think it's right around $300 or so, give or take. Most people buy that one in conjunction with their lifetime, fishing license, upland game bird, things like that. So which obviously adds more to the cost.
Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a good question for the good bringer of the bill. In this bill, we are creating a new account. And I'm wondering if you looked at alternatives of implementing this without creating a new account.
Representative Western.
Mr. Chairman, you could, but this one simply just dedicates it so there's a clear delineation of how this specific $9 revenue must be used. Again, if you read, splitting it between access agreements and also making sure there's funding available for wildlife improvement, for corridors and things like that.
Any discussion on the bill? Okay, Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Should I move the amendment at this time?
Yes, if
Okay.
you wish.
I move committee of the whole amendment number 1 and ask for your favorable consideration. And I'll explain it now. I've taken and requested an amendment to go from a $21 conservation stamp down to a $15 conservation stamp. So this would actually be.
Representative,
Yes.
if you would move your committee of the whole amendment, you said standing committee amendment.
Okay. Yeah, I move committee the whole amendment number 1 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you.
I did it twice.
Proceed.
There we go. Okay. So this is a committee of the whole amendment that would go from a $9 increase, a 75% increase, to a $3 increase, which would be a 25% increase. I definitely think that access is an amazing thing, and I think it's a good thing. We are a state that has 3 million acres of land that is locked, public land that is locked. And so access, yes, is a great program, and funding, it's a great program. Also, the 15% pull off for the improvement of the wildlife habitat is a great idea as well. But I just feel like at this point in time, a 75% increase is extensive. That's huge. Also, I think that we need to realize that if we're not careful, we're making hunting more and more expensive, which is okay. I understand that we need to fund our organizations that help us make this reality, but I think we need to be careful. So I did a breakdown on the fiscal note. It would take the fiscal note of the overall increase from $1,665,270 down to $555,090. And then the breakdown would be $471,826.50 for access, yes. And then $83,263.50 into the management side of it for the fish crossings and all of the different things that would be in that. So I would just ask that you guys would consider bringing this from a $9 increase to a $3 increase. We'd still would be helping with the access issues, but we would not be doing it at the rate of a 75% increase to our conservation stamp. And I stand for questions.
Any questions on committee of the whole amendment number 1? Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly appreciate that it's percentage-wise not a small increase. There's no question about that, but I asked the body to reject this amendment, and this is why. If public access wasn't a big deal to hunters, I'd say we should adopt it. But public access is a huge deal to hunters. If you go up to a hunter in the main streets of whatever your hometown is, and you ask, hey, list the 5 things that are most important to you in hunting, almost without exception, they're going to say, public access is really important to me. And this is something this bill has broad support amongst the biggest industry leaders in hunting. I've talked to their founders, their CEOs, and they're all saying, we love this. Our customers will benefit from this. From some of the nonprofits around the state that advocate for hunters and for wildlife, they're all thumbs up. I've gotten calls from just random subsistence hunters who hunt for me. They say, you know what? This gives me better access, and I'm on board with that. It strikes the balance between granting access for the hunting public, but also respecting private property rights. So I strongly encourage the body to reject this because public access is so important. The fee increase, it's significant, but what we will get in return for it is equally, if not greater, in terms of what we get. We don't mind spending the money as long as we get a return. And there's no question that the programs that are on the books do work and that we are, as a hunting public, getting a return. So I ask the body to reject the amendment. Thank you.
Representative Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the bill, against the amendment, I would like to make a motion that we approve the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the bill, against the amendment, I would like to make a motion that we approve the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the bill, against the amendment, in my neck of the woods, we have a tremendous amount of non-residents that come up to fish what's considered the Miracle Mile. And this fee increase on the conservation stamp, I think, is going to a tremendous cause and will supply greater access within a short amount of time and provide the tools necessary. So let's leave it with the original plan, and I urge a no vote on the amendment and for the bill.
We're on committee of the whole amendment number 1, Representative Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the amendment. I'd like to ask on a question, if we keep raising the fees of our, of our stamps, has there been any study done on whether or not, hunters will go through and just buy a lifetime stamp? And then where will that throw off all of the equation of how much you're going to bring in annually with the individual stamps versus someone goes with a full lifetime? How does that lifetime go into, how does different from the stamps themselves? Just kind of a question for me. Thank you.
Representative Haroldson, will you take that question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the question being the fees with the lifetime, correct? Okay, so obviously, and I guess I'll add this in, I've had a lifetime since I was 13. So this doesn't affect me at all. And I have had that. So obviously the lifetime hunting license, which would be anything from a fishing license, small game, upland game, and conservation, or all of the above, locks in a price much lower than what would be current. And so, yeah, I mean, we definitely could push that. It would be an instant gain, obviously, but a long-term loss. I mean, those are things that are definitely a consideration. And I don't know, I think something we need to bring up is when the conservation stamp first went into effect in, I believe it was 1984, and I may be wrong on that. This was produced as a temporary fee. This is a temporary thing just to help us through some issues, and it will go away. Well, that was a couple years before I was even born, so I'm not quite sure how that one worked for us. But I just think that having this concept of an increase, it serves a great purpose. I just don't know if it needs to be a 75% great purpose. And so, yeah, will it push more people to lifetimes? It definitely could. I mean, I definitely will be purchasing lifetimes for my kids as soon as I can. So anyways, thank you, guys.
Representative Jennings.
Yeah, on for the amendment and against the bill. I talked, I'm sure the good bringer of the bill and I may be running a little bit different circles, but some of the people that I talk to back home, they're trying to put meat in their freezer. And I just don't think, access is important. It's available right now. Right now, all these people that want to give, just check the little box and give. And so, there's people out there that I was talking to someone the other day from one of our northeastern counties, and their average of income has gone way down, or it's down. And I look at this, and this is just another 75% tax. So for the amendment, against the bill.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in support of the bill, against the amendment. I've had just receiving a lot of communication from folks up in my part of the world that where hunting and conservation stamps are very, very important. They're willing to pay this fee increase and understand the good that it does, making sure that we have access into these agreements, the Fish and Game put in order. I never quite understood this argument that I'm going to go hunting and because I need meat for the freezer because it's cheaper. They must hunt differently than I do, because it always costs more for me by the time you load up everything and get everything ready and go out. And for the return on that, it's I don't know that that's a money saving in Denver, it kind of makes you feel like Conan the Barbarian or something, and makes you feel good about what you're doing, but I don't know that it saves you money. I think the point here is there are private landowners that live along the river and live in other places that are willing to let people hunt on their place, and the fishing games or that agency has gone out and worked out agreements where they have walk-in authority and do some things, and these conservation stamps have allowed a far greater access for people like me that I use those lands. And I think that way to go, and against the amendment and for the bill.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if either the bringer of the amendment or the bringer of the bill can answer when the last time conservation stamps price was increased, and if you know from what to what. Thank you.
Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am against the amendment and for the bill. Even with this increase, our stamps are still lower than our neighboring states, Nebraska, Colorado, Utah, and South Dakota. And I hope that during public testimony in the committee, that if our hunters were against this increase, they would have shown up in force. But instead, I've only received emails in favor of this bill. So thank you for your consideration, again, against the amendment for the bill.
Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm on the amendment for that, against the bill. Just got a question, I guess, and maybe it's already been answered. The Game and Fish is paying for this already. Is that coming out of their budget internally? Is one question, or does some of the conservation stamp dollars currently go to that? And I guess the amount that they're using right now would be a good, I'd like to know that.
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually looking for the conservation stamp increase in the last one. And I'm not finding that. So honestly, I was not listening to the question because I was looking for that. So if I messed up there, if I could get a refresher on the question so I could answer it.
Any further discussion on Committee of the Whole Amendment number 1? Representative Western. Okay. All right. No further discussion. Question having been called. All those in favor of Committee of the Whole Amendment number 1, please say aye. All opposed, say no. Committee of the Whole Amendment number 1 has failed. We're back on the bill. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to answer a couple of the quick questions I heard. I believe it was last raised in the mid aughts or late aughts, I think, right in that ballpark. I think it was by a couple of bucks, but I have to double check that. And to the good gentleman from the Bighorn Basin, some of it does go currently to funding the access programs that we have on the books. But again, it's really just not that much. And if you look at some of our other states that have the same issues of public land access, they have really good access for their hunters because there's a lot of funding sources for that access. So again, hunters are always talking about, oh God, I wish I had more public access, all this griping. This is hunters stepping up to the plate and saying, all right, we have the stones to walk the walk on this one and actually pay out of our own pockets for that access. So again, I encourage an aye vote. Thank you. Question.
Any further discussion? Question having been called. All those in favor of Chairman Flintner's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report, it do so with a recommendation that House Bill 122 do pass, please say aye. All opposed, no. House Bill 112, I apologize. House Bill 112 is passed Committee of the Whole. I apologize again. 122 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. Motion passes. Mr. Speaker.
Reading clerk, please read the committee of the whole report.
Mr. Speaker, your committee of the whole, having had under consideration bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. House Bill 67, due pass amended. House Bill 150, due pass amended. House Bill 160, due pass amended. House Bill 14, due pass amended. House Bill 179, due pass. House Bill 122, due pass amended. Representative Burkhart, Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, I move committee of the whole report.
Members, you've heard the motion to adopt the committee of the whole report. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. The motion is adopted. Thank you, Chairman Burkhart. Message from the Senate.
Message number 200. Mr. Speaker, the bill listed below passed the Senate on third reading in an amended form by the vote indicated. Senate File 87, voyeurism amendments, ayes 30. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk.
Thank you. Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to House Rule 12-11C, having voted on the prevailing side of House Bill 133, I'm giving notice of my intent to ask for reconsideration of the third reading vote tomorrow at the end of regular second reading before the budget bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. So members, I'm just going to restate what obviously was the notice. That was not a motion, that was a notice for reconsideration of a bill that was failed third reading today. And that'll be taken up after second reading on the bills that we just completed before second reading on the budget bill. That's the motion, the notice that we were given. Committee reports, reading clerk.
Mr. Speaker, your committee number 1, Judiciary, to whom was referred House Bill 212, criminal record expungement revisions, respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Craigo, Larson Dan, Oakley, Olson, Provenza, Rodriguez, Williams, Yin, Swanitzer. Noes, Representative Washit. Representative Olson, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 132, Casper State Office Building, naming. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Kinner, Larson Lloyd, Nicholas, Simpson, Stith, Walters. Noes, Representative Schwartz. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 164, Grand Teton National Park, transfer of state lands. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Nicholas, Schwartz, Simpson, Stith, Walters. Noes, Representatives Kinner and Larson Lloyd. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 3, Revenue, to whom was referred House Bill 151, Rolling Stock Tax Exemption Sunset Extension. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Gray, Hallinan, Harshman, Henderson, Jennings, Sweeney, Yin. Noes, Representatives Baker, Roscoe. Representative Henderson, Vice Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 3, Revenue, to whom was referred House Bill 176, Digital Streaming Tax. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes, Representatives Hallinan, Harshman, Henderson, Roscoe, Sweeney, Yin. Noes. Representatives Baker, Gray, Jennings. Representative Hallinan, Vice Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred House Bill 188, Irrigation District Loans. Respectfully report, same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Blackburn, Clausen, Eklund, Ortner, Heiner, Larson, Dan, Western, Winter. Excused, Representative Worf. Representative Eklund, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred House Bill 229, Livestock Identification Choice Act. Respectful report, same back to the House with a recommendation that do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Blackburn, Clausen, Eklund, Fortner, Heiner, Larson, Dan, Western, Winter. Excused, Representative Worf. Representative Eklund, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom is referred House Bill 115, Big or Trophy Game Animal Minimum Hunting Age. Respectful report, same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Fletner, Haroldson, Hunt, Jennings, Newsom, Winter. Noes. Representatives Banks, Knapp, Sweeney. Representative Fletner, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom is referred House Bill 156, 24-hour wine permits. Respectfully report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Banks, Fletner, Haroldson, Hunt, Jennings, Knapp, Newsom, Sweeney, Winter. Representative Fletner, Chairman. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, to whom was referred House Bill 190, Vehicle Titles for Non-Resident Owners. Respectful report, same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Baker, Brown, Burkhart, Burt, Obermueller, O'Hearn, Stivar. Noes. Representatives Henderson, McGuire. Representative Burkhart, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow, the 10th day of March, 2021.
Thank you. Committee announcements. I'll make the first one as folks get to the microphone. Rules Committee will meet upon adjournment today to hear 3 bills, House Bill 92, House Bill 123, and House Bill 36, Revisers Bill, Legislator Conference Travel, Management Council Membership. Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in room 3 in the connector to consider House Bill 217, Community Health Center and Rural Health Clinic grants. Thank you.
Chairman Paxton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 4, Education, will meet tomorrow upon noon recess to consider the following bills. House Bill 165, Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Program. That's a continuation from Monday. House Bill 154, School Finance, School District Reserves. House Bill 120, Hathaway Scholarship Success Curriculum in Middle School. And if time allows, House Bill 152, Hathaway Eligibility Requirements.
Thank you. Chairman Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, will meet tomorrow upon noon recess in EO5 to hear the following 3 bills. House Bill 143, Municipal Services Recovery Actions, House Bill 199, Vehicle Insurance Anti-Stacking Prohibition, and House Bill 185, Wine Assessment on Direct Sales.
Chairman Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 9, Minerals Business and Economic Development, will meet tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., March 10th, 2021. We will have a continuation from our Monday meeting. We will continue with public testimony on House Bills 155, 166, 258, 248. We plan to try to work those bills and move something forward or clear our deck, Mr. Speaker, one way or the other.
Thank you. Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your House Appropriations Committee will meet at, on noon recess. We'll have the continuation of House Bill 125, House Bill 254, and we will hear House Bill 243. And also continuation of 198.
Thank you. Chairman Olson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your committee number 1 judiciary will meet tomorrow at 7 a.m. in capital extension E001, whose online server appears to be improving and strengthening as time goes on, to continue hearing HB 213, disclosure of peace officer recordings, and then hear House Bill 116, concealed carry residency requirements 2, and House Bill 193, county attorneys representation of special districts.
Thank you very much. Further announcements, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. The committee of the whole list will go as the following. So remember that tomorrow is second reading of the budget. And so likely we won't have any then. And so the next bills will be likely Thursday when we're going to have our K-12 discussion. So that would be House Bill 173, House Bill 174. And then as time allows, hopefully we won't spend all that time on those, but as time allows, the next ones will be House Bill 112, House Bill 109, House Bill 144, House Bill 79, House Bill 96, House Bill 153, House Bill 163, House Bill 170, House Bill 136, and House Bill 212. So that'll be about 12 bills there.
Thank you for that optimistic list. Members, I just want to outline tomorrow just a little bit so that we're all on the same page. So tomorrow will be second reading on our regular bills, and then we'll take up the reconsideration vote, and then it'll be second reading on the budget. We're right at the 50-ish budget amendments that have been requested. So we'll see if there's how much attrition there is overnight. So based on the motion that the majority floor leader made, you need to have approval to LSO by 8 a.m. 8 a.m. Approve your amendments to LSO. And the important thing is that is one, if they're not approved, they're not eligible to be considered. And two, if the earlier they're approved, the more likely the chief clerk will have us a printed packet of amendments to use during second reading. So those are the two things. We may get to committee of the whole if we're efficient with our second readings. But tomorrow we've decided not to bring in dinner because basically where we are with the number of amendments. If we'd had probably in the 65 or 70 range, we'd have probably arranged for dinner. But in the 40 to 45 range, we can hopefully knock those out in 5 hours on the floor. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And if by chance, which it usually doesn't happen, but by chance, if we get done with those budget amendments in time and do go to committee of the whole, the 173 bill and the 174 bill won't be at the top of the list. It'll be what's below that. They will wait till Thursday regardless. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Further announcements? So members, the Wyoming House of Representatives, 66th Legislature will adjourn until 10 a.m. the 17th day of session, March 10th. All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, no. We are adjourned. Thank you for your